Devon, Tracey, welcome back and welcome to the Gauntlet.
I am here. I am in medieval times. I'm not sure. I'm a very visual guy, you realize. So I'm like scouring your
Okay.
screen to look at
Yeah.
every detail that you have included here, including
What,
dragons.
what jumps out?
There seems to be a war of some kind. I'm in the
Hmm.
middle of it. I don't know how. Why can't we all just get along?
Right. Yeah, I wanted to up the drama. I felt like the world of people chatting to each other online was getting stale. So I'm here to
Mm.
shake it up.
That is true. You say that in jest, but like conflict and fighting is more compelling, and yet
Hmm.
it's obnoxious to be a part of and not that productive. So it's kind of the split between like online world conversations where
Yeah.
half of the aim is to get clicks and retain attention. So you're gonna
Hmm.
have animosity. Whereas in real life, it's like, hey, how you doing? How's the weather? It's like everyone's much more amiable in
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. I guess conflict is one of those things that we're drawn to as humans, but also is like actually very damaging to the species. So I don't know how we're
But
going to
yeah,
get over that.
but conflict for the sake of conflict, for the sake of drama, is
Hmm.
that is tiresome. I mean, because I
Mm.
sometimes reflect on why I don't talk to people. So this is a real deviation for me to be talking to another human. How does it work again? I say something, make noises, and then you make noises. Is that the general?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we could try making noises at the same time and then stopping at the same time.
This is good
That
practice
might
for
work.
me. Yeah, they did that for a couple centuries. Um, okay,
Well,
I'll
I
do my
feel
best.
very privileged to be able to talk to you. It's one of those weird things where I listen to you a lot online. So you're
Mm,
in my world, you exist as a sort of celebrity in the same space
hmm.
as like A-list Hollywood actors. But then and then I talk to you, and it's like, oh, you're very much a real person who I can interact with. So that's
Well,
enjoyable.
I appreciate that, and it is interesting the how much you prioritize the fame of someone in your own mind.
Mm,
Because like my timeline, there are famous people who are legitimately not famous at all, but in my mind, they're
mhm.
like really big deal. And so
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think there's anything more important than what's happening in your brain. So I take that as a big compliment.
Mm. All right. Should we play the game? Round one. Would you like to talk about music, economics, or cosmology?
Oh my God. This is wild. Well, I mean, based off the fact that I don't know anything about most of this, let's go with music. I do relate to it.
All right. Here's your three assertions, and you can either argue for or against any of them. So, classical Western music theory is irrelevant. Live music is more important than recorded music, or
Hmm.
lyrics make little impact to a song.
Hmm. No, I'm gonna actually think here. More important. What a weird thing to say. Um, lyrics make little impact to a song. See, that speaks to my heart. Um, yeah, I mean, I could argue the third one. I mean,
All right.
because well, my favorite song is "Smells Like Teen Spirit," and
Mm,
the lyrics are intentionally absurdist. And when he was asked about them, he would say, like, he would just dismiss it, like it doesn't matter. The whole he would say "Never Mind," which is the name of the album. Like
mm,
it was about the energy, it was about everything. I think that the lyrics could take a song to the next level and obviously add some sort of impact, but I would say less is more. Like less literal, the better. Less
mhm.
on the nose. Like don't preach. Make it poetic. Make it ambiguous. Which he does very successfully. But let me see. The statement is lyrics make little impact. I see. Another one of my favorite songs right now is a song from a French person, and I, even though I took French, I don't speak it. I have no idea
Mhm.
what she's talking about, and I
Mhm.
guarantee you, if I did read the lyrics, it would lessen the experience for me
Mm.
because I want it to be profound, and because it's
It's not going to
obscure
live
to
up
me,
to.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely not, absolutely not. So I think lyrics can be an afterthought, and I think it's safe to say they're not the driving soul of a song. Like no one put it this way: no one reads poetry and just goes, "Ah," they're not orgasmic after just like reading a few paragraphs of lyrics. You need the music. The music is the driving force. What do you think?
I I think you're underselling poetry. There's I think we don't experience poetry because our culture is focused on music, but actually, if you've ever like read a poem enough times that it's deeply within your brain, then the words by themselves, I think, do take on a deep beauty. A bit like you were saying that the French song would be lessened by knowing what the words say. I think there is something about a poem that if you set it to music, you can cheapen it. There's kind of an artistic choice for silence, for removing inputs.
Well, we're stuffing a lot of things in here because, like, if you go to read poetry, first of all, this is painfully British for you to say that you're into poetry, but like, I don't even know where would you even go for that. But like, you're there on a different journey. You're seeking something else. Music, you could be looking for a ton of different stuff: escapism, energy, fun, emotions, like, and a wide variety of things. But poetry, I would expect people are looking for something a bit more distilled, profound, impactful. And so, yeah, setting that to music does seem like a cheap Disney sort of hallmark. I don't want to disparage Disney. Disney has done some good stuff, so that was unfair of me. But like, yeah, lyrics. It's a rare compliment to say someone's a good lyricist. You know, you don't really hear that often.
I'd argue that Kurt Cobain was a great lyricist.
Yeah,
I mean, he describes everything he does in that kind of casual throwaway manner. I can't imagine if you asked Kurt Cobain, do chord sequences matter, that he'd suddenly turn into a music nerd and start talking about, well, the subdominant has to go to the, he'd say, rhythm doesn't matter, music. But actually, he just was able to exude genius, partly because of his laid-back attitude. But you could ruin a Nirvana song by writing prissy, overly detailed lyrics, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching Eurovision right now. I'm sort of hyper analyzing it, and some of the songs are so cliche, and lyrically, it's just nauseating. Like the French put out a song this year called, not kidding you, the name of the song is L'Amour, and I'm just like, I'm already so out of this. Like, don't put the word love in your song.
Unless it's ironic. I could imagine the French Eurovision entry called L'Amour, which was heavy metal or trance or something.
Well, Eurovision Sweden, they hosted a few years ago, and they put out a funny musical segment the host did to sort of set the tone, and it was called Love, Love, Peace, Peace. And it was a song that was intentionally a conglomeration of every cliche Eurovision has ever put forward. And literally songs this year have the similar names and themes, and it's always about peace and love, and it's just, oh God, that is so creatively and spiritually stale and dead to me that it makes me shudder. But like, Kurt was random. See, I say don't put love in the title of a song or in the lyrics of your song. I also say don't say the word rape on a first date. Just don't say it, like, in any context. But like, Kurt has a song called "Rape Me," which is just like, and people would listen to it. I remember there's some girls in the '90s who were like, "Yeah, I wasn't really into that 'Rape Me' song. That was kind of like, I didn't quite get where you were going with that." But
I'll tell you my favorite lyric from a Eurovision song. Do you remember in 2015, Israel made a song called "Golden Boy"?
Of course I do. Yes.
And the lyric was, I'm a golden boy, come here to enjoy, and before I leave, let me show you Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv, right? The rhyme with Tel Aviv. I know. He was on a rooftop in Tel Aviv. Those were simpler times for Israel.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm a golden boy. I was trying to figure out if that guy was gay the whole time. My gaydar is always set to they're all gay, but like, I don't know if he actually was. His backup dancers were.
Your prior when you're talking about Eurovision is they're probably gay. But then there's always an exception. I from time to time I do
Mhm.
karaoke, and I'm straight as an arrow, but you wouldn't think that.
What's your go-to song?
Well, that's a good question. I see. I'll make it even worse. I like singing Elton John.
My God. Okay.
Maybe I'm not straight. Maybe I've been misled this whole
I
time.
don't have an appreciation for Elton. Elton is
No,
Elton is not my guy. Yeah, I don't know, but I have been
Billy Joel's the more respectable piano man these days.
yeah, those two guys kind of skip my sense. Like I never quite got them. And even same with
Mm.
David Bowie. Like
Hmm.
there's a certain thing, but I'm sure you were exposed to it in a different way than I was.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think I just didn't experience much pop music up to the age
uh,
of about 15 or 20. So the small amount that I had, like I
I
listened
see.
to Reach by S Club 7 enough times that I put that on a pedestal as well, as if
Mm.
it's Bach.
Yeah, it's true. It's like when I was a kid, we had certain VHS tapes that somehow
Yeah.
made it. We bought them somehow. So, like, if it's a rainy day and I'm sick, I'm watching the same 5 movies over and over again. And it's
Yes.
not that those movies were better than anyone else's or any other
Hmm.
movie. It was just that I seen it so many times that it's like scripture to me. Like it's just like I have a reverence for that film.
Yeah, it's no longer that you're evaluating it as an abstract idea, that
Mm,
those specific shapes and patterns and sounds have a
sure.
history with you, and it
Yes.
lines up with events in your personal life.
Yeah, and that's hard to actually tear that apart and break the nostalgia free from the actual product to figure out, is this actually even good at all, or is it just
Right.
me reminiscing about my childhood?
Yeah.
That's a tricky one, actually. And it, not to deviate to religious talk, but I think that a lot of religious people cling to religion
Hmm.
because it's what bonds them with their parents, and it reminds them of their family and their childhood and their the history of their family. It's like this glue. So when you're
Hmm.
talking to someone about religion, you're insulting the love they have between themselves and their parents, or you're challenging it.
Hmm.
And that's where all the friction comes in.
Do you think the same effect could happen in a secular or an atheist household if you grew up bonding with your parents over the lack of religion, that they'd make fun of religions, and
How do
you'd
you
be
do
like,
that?
I don't know.
That's so weird, bonding over the lack of something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really brought up. It's
Okay.
yeah. I mean, people always talk about that. It's so weird to be a non something and to be known as being a
Mm,
non something, a nonce.
yeah.
Um,
But when throughout most of human history, people have
mm,
had one religion or another, then to exit out of that system, to be an edge case, is discussion worthy in a way.
huh. That's an interesting take. I think yeah, religion has been so neutered in the past several generations that it's not that big of a statement to say I am not religious. I don't partake. I don't believe in it. I mean, the
Mm,
Church of England was phase one of the castration process, but then in America, it's just like what? There's everything else to be concerned about. The Easter Bunny and
mm.
Santa Claus are more popular than Jesus Christ. I mean, as are the Beatles. So it's like I don't know. It's not that big of a part of society that I grew up in.
Do you
I mean,
think of the people say woke as a religion? Is
right.
there a religiosity that clings to us regardless of whether we have a bucket to put it in?
Yeah, it's very true, and there's a great case to be made for that. I think who's that black linguist? He wrote a book about it where he takes that analogy to the nth degree. Uh, but yes, there's a lot of similar mechanisms at play. But what I love is half the time it's religious people making the commentary that wokeness
Hmm.
is a religion, and it's like the atheist is sitting there going, "Yes, it's bad. That's what we're saying. we're, it's yes, you've spotted the pattern and the similarities, but
Yeah.
like we don't want to descend into that." for
Yeah.
similar reasons.
Did you see the Richard Dawkins thing a couple
Yeah,
of days ago? He
I did.
he was saying that he'd be upset to see churches torn down. This is not entirely a new perspective
Not
from
at all.
Dawkins.
No, he's been saying this for years. This is, I mean, I've known the guy, not personally, but I just bought his book, The Magic of
Mm,
Reality. It's a great book, and I'm trying to learn about the cosmos through Dawkins. But like, yeah, he has a fondness, but this goes back to the nostalgia thing. Dawkins was
mm.
born in 1939, actually out in Africa, very similar to my father.
Huh.
Same year actually, and
Wow.
then was raised back home. And it's like, yeah, churches are everywhere. I mean, this is England. This is Christopher Hitchens wrote pieces very similar to this, where he said, you know, I like hearing the bells. I like the tradition, but it's
Mm,
not. He's like, it's all bullshit. He's very clear. He's like, look, don't.
mm.
Hey, religious people, don't think that some prominent atheist is sitting here
Right.
saying that he's wrong. He's not. It's just he likes the pageantry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it's a face-to-face with Islam, that's a separate question. And if you want to go head-to-head there's a very good reason, many reasons why he would side with Christianity.
Hmm. Well, there's potentially the opportunity to come back to the topic of religion in later rounds.
Yes.
But I'm going to give you 11 points for round one. So you're
My
off to
God.
a strong start.
The judgments is so crazy. I'm going to score your judging of me a 3 out of 5, just to
Okay,
the
great.
power dynamic here is something I'm not comfortable with. Okay.
I have control of the screen, which gives me fundamentally the most power here.
I'm being judged. It's unbelievable.
But you have more subscribers than me, which is the modern
No, I don't.
the ultimate
quantifier.
Actually,
my channels have all been nuked and obliterated because I'm
yeah.
too I don't know what I am too. I'm too everything. But no,
you can't help yourself.
No.
You're a creative soul, and that sometimes means putting, you know, nudity, violence, political unacceptable speech, you know, whatever takes your fancy.
Yeah, it is a curse. What can I say?
It's a cross to bear. Ethics, history, or metaphysics?
Ooh. Ethics is a bit gay, and I'm actually getting a little bit more depressed the more I think about it. Metaphysics, that's interesting. But I'm a history major, so I got to go with history.
Okay. Pandemics have been pivotal in shaping human history. Most wars are rooted in economic motives, or cultures that adapt are most likely to survive. Slightly Darwinian anthropology at the end there.
Interesting. Adapt to what in particular? Most wars are rooted in economic motives. Huh. That's a tricky one. Okay. Fascinating. I feel like I'm playing an old video game. Like I want these things to like light up when I hover over them.
This is basically a simulation of what happens in my brain when there's a lull in conversation in real life.
Do you have pre-planned things to talk about?
This list of topics is essentially, yes.
Are you lull adverse? Do you fear the lull?
I probably have the natural instinct. I can usually open my mouth and something will come out. So I've spent very little of my life in silence. You know, they say that if you are really comfortable with someone, you can sit in silence with them. And from that, I determined that I've never really been comfortable with anybody.
I mean, yeah, the unspoken thing that is said is like, yeah, we have limited time on Earth, and we're sitting here not talking, which is to say we have nothing of interest to say. I don't care about you. I'm not interested to know your thoughts. We have no chemistry. Like the silence is saying so much theoretically. Yeah, it's a
on the flip side, there is a comfortable silence, or we were talking about power earlier. If you have the self-control and the discipline to create a silence, I mean, silence is powerful in interrogation, right?
Definitely.
You can get a lot out of somebody by letting them run their mouth
Oh my God, I'm actually a student of the less is more. And
Mm,
the more I live, the more I'm fascinated with what the choices people make where they don't say something,
yeah.
or the
Yeah.
things they choose not to say. That the editor in me has risen
Hmm.
to the top. And like, yeah, I'm watching an interview with Diane Sawyer and Scott Peterson, this murder, and she's like
Hmm.
asking him a question, and he gives an answer, and it's like a bogus answer, and she doesn't say anything. She just looks at him, like
Mm.
three,
Yeah.
three, 4 seconds go by, and then he feels obligated. Oh, I should probably say some more.
Yeah.
Um,
I think you have to have the two sides in your brain to be a creative. You've got to be able to turn on the tap and just produce rubbish and nonsense. And then you've
mm,
got to have the editor, the what do they say, kill your darlings. And that's the side that appreciates, you know, most books should
mm.
not be books. They should be articles, right? And most
But
articles should just be tweets.
yeah, editors do not get the glory because no one
Mm,
sees what's on the editing room floor because it's all
yeah.
shit. But like,
Yeah.
if you could see the stuff that was cut out, and the editors save things all the time. I mean, honestly, an
Hmm.
editor is like they should be. They're more important than the writer. They're editors make
Mm.
everything. But anyway,
Imagine how good this conversation would have been if we'd have
if
got an
we had an
editor.
editor,
Yeah.
he would have scraped it down to just nothing. It was just like a 3 second little haiku. Just, I mean, he just walked away. Um, yeah, no, but I honestly like it is such an interest. Like even Twitter, like the fact that Twitter
Mm.
is popular or gained its original popularity because of its limitation of what you could say.
Hmm.
Like, get to the point, dude. So that was a noble effort on the
So somebody
legislature.
once suggested a twist on social media where you're only allowed to post one thing per day. I
Wow,
thought that was a pretty cool idea.
that would be
No matter how many
intriguing.
followers you have, you got to pick your one output for the day.
I'd still flame some dude on Twitter with just cuss words. It would still be, it would just be more crafted, finely. Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't
Which
agree.
one do you want to pick?
I don't think pandemics have been pivotal in shaping human history.
You want to pick that as an argue
Yeah,
against? All
I
right.
don't believe so at all. I think they're just obnoxious and annoying. In there's many other things. Again, the editor. It's what we're not talking about. Human history has been shaped by
Hmm.
way more important phenomena than a mere pandemic, and we've only had however many we've had. I mean, in living memory, it's a couple. But
Hmm.
medicine has progressed at the rate it has. It's obviously been exponential in recent times. But I mean,
Hmm.
where was I reading recently? The science, like modern science, has only been around a few hundred years. We're just
Hmm.
getting going with this stuff. But yeah, a bunch of people have died off through disease, and you could talk about smallpox. You could talk about the new world meeting the old world and the fallout from that. And then, of course, they gave us syphilis, which was not appreciated. And people have died, and the life expectancy was like 20 something years, 30 years, not long ago. But human history, it seems a little bit grandiose to say that pandemics are some like
I, I had an interesting idea that the Renaissance was partly as a result of the plague. So many people
mhm,
died, and the people who were left over became relatively wealthy. They
wow,
inherited
the
everything that
culling
was
of the
lying
herd.
around. Yeah, and then because they were rich, they then had the spare resources that they could put it into the arts and everything that flowed from the
Well, I mean,
Renaissance.
yeah, you could get deep and say like death. Death is pivotal in shaping human history. I'm talking
Mm,
widespread death. Um, like you look at German history, they lose all their men in World War II, and so
mm,
they invite a bunch of Muslims in from Turkey, and the cultural history of that nation is completely forever shaped by that. It wasn't a
mm,
pandemic; it was a war, but the result was the same. It was mass death. So yeah, there's going to be new opportunity when you sort of burn the landscape down and have a chance for new growth. But I mean, I'm so tired of pandemic. Honestly, like I'm weary of the topic since 2020 because having lived through that, I almost died. I got it twice really bad down in Brazil, And
Oh, man.
then to hear the chirping from people trying to pretend like they were right all along and vaccines are nothing, and just it is so tiresome. And I'm so happy we have turned the page as a collective from pandemics.
Yeah, which almost makes me not want to continue discussing it right now. But
Okay.
I'll tell you what. Let's draw the round short, and I'm going to give you 12, and we can move on. Next round: cinema and theatre, world affairs, or epistemology.
Oh man. Okay. Those are juicy. I'm going to stay away from the juice. I'm going to go to cinema and theater.
All right. Cinema is most important for its visual spectacle. The audience is passive in receiving content. Or adaptations, sequels, and remakes stifle originality.
You came up with these, huh? You sit at home and think of this.
Yeah. I actually smashed this list of topics out pretty quickly. I was in quite a hurry.
I assume that you have thoughts on each of these things.
Yeah.
Adaptations, sequels, and remakes stifle originality. I mean, I'd like to discuss it. I'm not exactly a debate bro. I'm not Christopher Hitchens here, but like, I think there's a lot to be said with that. Let's talk about that. Adaptations, sequels, and remakes. I mean, all of them are interesting, but
I'm scoring for as much as you care about the scores. I'm scoring on the interest of the discussion, how much I enjoy it, more so than. God. Debate bro is pretty tiring.
You are the most passive-aggressive man I've ever encountered. I cannot believe this is going a conversation with a person you've never talked to. Okay, it's seriously like one of the craziest things I've ever. Okay, it's like going on a date and like every time you bite into your food, I'm going to judge how good your lips look, just so you know.
It is a stupid. When I originally came up with the concept, then I did appreciate there's a certain irony to it, and I've railed in the past against the dismal reign of quantity and the fact that the most important things in life cannot be quantified, and then here I am introducing a format to the world that implies.
That's part of the absurdity of Eurovision is the scoring of art, which is wonderful. But no, these are interesting topics. So I'll take it for what it is. Yeah. So opening salvo, adaptations, sequels, and remakes have been dominating Hollywood out of laziness. And the formula has been name recognition, sort of capitalize off the nostalgia of an old IP and then just run with it because it's safe. Because you can exploit the familiarity, half the marketing's already been done for you. And people have grown weary of it, and a lot of inferior products have been pumped out. And also insults to the original brand. The quality has suffered. And so it's all a little bit cynical and depressing. That being said, there are some notable exceptions. And that's what interests me is where it's like, wait a minute, this shouldn't have been good, but it's good. A couple come to mind. Puss in Boots. Puss in Boots Part 2.
Okay, wow. So I didn't see it.
You have to see it. I'm not kidding you. You have to see this film. It's animated gorgeously. It's voiced by, who's that Spaniard? Antonio Banderas. We're talking about Shrek. In Shrek, the side character, Puss in Boots, has a cameo. He does a spin-off movie, which is fine, the first one. 10 years go by or something like that. They put out a second one. Whoever was responsible for writing and creating that film deserves all the awards. It is a fantastic film. Funny. What? Speak.
I didn't say anything. Well, I'm feeling left out now because I haven't seen it. But
okay. I will then stop the commercial for it. But I will say that it is crazy because it is a sequel, and it absolutely is completely original, completely original and genius level work done on that, as is the show Fargo. So that the TV show Fargo.
Yeah. If this is possible, so here's a theory. Tell me if you think this might be correct. That a sequel is something that people expect to be good, and it's actually just like rolling the dice again. So a random property in the, every time you make a film, you roll the dice, and you sometimes get a hit, and sometimes you get a flop. And then when you do a sequel, you're rolling the dice again. When the sequel is another good dice roll, that's when you get something like Star Wars, a multi-generational franchise. Just because Empire Strikes Back happened to be a second good dice roll. And that's my theory for the success of the Star Wars franchise.
I would counter that by saying that yes, it's a sequel, but not really, because Lucas had written it all out before. So it was part of a larger story. It's episode 5, for example. It's not even part 2. So it's not like he had to come up with a new story based off the success of the first one. Most sequels are not part of a large pantheon of storytelling that's just waiting to be developed. It's like, do you know what they called Ghostbusters, the second film?
No.
They called it Ghostbusters 2. Like, I don't even think it had a tagline. It was just Ghostbusters 2. And it was like, oh, okay. So very little thought.
in the case of Empire Strikes, so I don't know how much I buy George Lucas claiming that he had a master plan from the beginning. As far as I can tell, he didn't really pull Empire Strikes Back from the middle of this mythical draft that he claims to have written. Because I gather his story is he took the first act of a longer script and turned that into A New Hope, and then was successful enough to be able to make the trilogy.
I wonder why is it universally accepted that that's the best film of the Star Wars first 3? Because I mean, I know it's an awesome film.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a very complicated question. I think the original Star Wars probably should get more credit than it does, because a lot of the stuff that's good in Empire Strikes Back is just bringing back the ideas that were in the original. But I think the first draft of Empire Strikes Back was actually written by Lee Brackett, and I've read that version of it, and it's insane. It's terrible.
Really?
Yeah, it's very different. Like, some of the same character names show up, but it's wildly different.
There's a lot of things that work in that film, but like one of these things go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a lot of the credit for making Empire Strikes Back work probably should go to Irvin Kershner, the director, who previously had not done anything sci-fi and had done these little character pieces where it was just a couple of actors, shoestring budget. And Empire Strikes Back in some ways is the best of the original trilogy because it takes its characters so seriously. The character drama is stronger, never mind everything else.
The dialogue has to work. It has to work on the micro and the macro. So like if it's Luke with Yoda, or if it's Han Solo being rapey with Leia, or if it's Han and Luke and that sort of the bravado and that sort of sibling rivalry. I like it, but also a good villain makes a good movie. And this film, the title of the film, it's the villain strikes back. It's the Empire. No Death Star is being destroyed, so we're not going to rehash that. It's not looking good for the ragtag group of rebels. Dudes like Boba Fett entering the fray. I mean, just completely awesome. Talk about a guy who doesn't say much but had a big impact. Boba Fett, my God. So giving power to the Empire and rising that sort of ominous darkness, that is what intrigued the audience and made us, oh my God, there's some stakes here. Jesus. Like, what's going to happen? Our guys are dying.
Yeah. My other theory about what's actually makes a good movie is it's the score. And John Williams did such an incredible job. The scene where Yoda is lifting the X-Wing may be the greatest 30 seconds of music that's ever been written, I think. The last bit as well, just before the credits roll, when the main characters are looking out across the galaxy, and you've got this deeply wistful, bittersweet theme playing, and to go out on that note, which is such a bold artistic decision to finish a film hoping that you make enough money to complete the trilogy and leave it on such an ambiguous note that's so different from the way the first film ended. And I think the music is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, that's the worst kept secret in the business, is that it's all about the soundtrack. But like my greatest compliment to the X-Wing scene is that I've seen that film, 50 times. I've never noticed the music because it's embedded in the experience.
Yes.
But if I were to hear it now, it would evoke something within me. And they're basically masterful at this. And I mean, don't they bring out the London Symphony or the orchestra?
Yes.
I mean, it's top of the line stuff. So really, you come for the movie, but stay for the score. I mean, the score is the show.
One of the interesting things to do is to actually compare the opening of the main theme, the fanfare that happens at the beginning of the movie, between the different Star Wars films, because it's essentially the same notes. It might literally be the same notes that were given to the players. And I'd argue that the, episodes 4, 5, and 6, which were the London Symphony Orchestra in, I think in Abbey Road in London.
Oh, right. Yes.
And John Williams credits one specific trumpet player. You think of an orchestra as this blend of 70 instruments, and you couldn't possibly pick someone out. But John Williams says that a lot of the power of the Star Wars fanfare comes down to this one guy, and it was one of his first sessions when he played the original Star Wars theme. Yeah,
he's an MVP.
And if you listen to the prequels, all had the same theme. It was recorded once, and they reused it for 1, 2, and 3. And I think it's not quite as good as any of the takes that they did for 4, 5, and 6. And then there's the Disney films where they recorded it once and have used it for the beginning of all the Disney films in LA, I think. And in my opinion, significantly worse. It sounds way less heroic and exciting.
You're talking about the first opening score, like, of the film?
Yeah. That bit.
Interesting.
And if you go and listen to the soundtrack that was used on 7, 8, and 9, I don't rate it. I think it's nowhere near as good.
Well, you made me think about these prequels, and for all the shit that they took, and deservedly so, there's some criticism to be had, and Jar Jar Binks and all that. The one thing you never heard criticized, or I didn't at least, was Duel of Fates. So the Duel of Fates theme, I mean, it was glorious. I mean, it's a great track, and it totally does justice to, like, it's like, oh, they brought the same guy back and he still got it, was the vibe I took. It was like, and he's going in a new direction, but he's staying with the old themes. I mean, I think, didn't John Williams just retire, like, just now?
Oh, I hadn't heard that. I mean, he's in his 90s, so
yeah, he can wrap it up. But I mean, God, what a career! It's astonishing what he's contributed.
Yeah. I think Rey's theme is one of the genuine moments of creative flourish in the new films. Wow. All right. I mean, that
it's sacrilegious to say something positive about the new Star Wars films, but I would push back on that. I was a big fan of the new ones. For all the, I don't know what people are expecting from movies anymore. They expect some like affirmation of their life in 2 hours. It's just unrealistic.
Do you think the Zoomers are going to have the same? The prequels have gone through this arc where Red Letter Media dumped on them, and then the millennials have come and said, actually, we love the prequels. Are we going to get the same thing with the Zoomers love the sequels?
I don't know where they stand on it. Actually, I don't care, but I I don't know. I mean, I think that those movies that would be a fascinating conversation, but I'm so sick of the generic, I'm going to regurgitate what my timeline tells me to say about this. Like, oh, Game of Thrones, not good in the final season. I said the thing I'm supposed to say. No, it's bullshit. Like, come on, man. This is a great show. Yeah. And also, it's bullshit. The same way you critique me over our conversation, critiquing a show based off its seasons is kind of lame. To me, that's a real weird thing to be like, season 7 wasn't as good as season 6. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It is weird to be so kind of introspective, and it's probably a factor of my own personality that I would change if I could. There's this short story by Dostoevsky,
Mhm.
Notes from Underground, and the main character in it is lamenting the fact that he's this kind of intellectual. He's got a very high opinion of himself. He thinks he's a genius, and then he's talking about these men of action who are like low IQ heroes who can just
Mm.
act when the moment seizes them. They live in the moment, and I relate to that a lot. That I think I'm way too introspective, and it
Yeah.
would be better to just experience things,
I call that mental masturbation is one way to
Mm.
phrase that. But yeah, you can delve into that. It's just when it comes to the Star Wars crap, it's just I don't know. I think each film is kind of awesome on its own, and look, there's a law of diminishing returns here. So if they're going to
Mm.
wow you with this whole world they've created, and then I got to
Mhm.
do it again and again and again, like wait a minute, I
Yeah.
can't blow your mind every time out,
Yeah.
which is why, by the way, depressingly, Star Wars has given us the same goddamn take out the shield to kill the Death Star thing. Like, I
Right.
mean, we got to have a new story besides that one.
Okay, one last comment before
Yeah.
we finish this round.
Mhm.
I have have you seen that video essay, Everything is a Remix?
Yes, I have at some point.
The premise being, and Star Wars is a good, it might actually be the thing they use in that essay to explain the concept, but
Mhm.
every good and interesting thing that people create is built by piecing together the best parts of whatever the creator had experienced up till then in their
Mhm.
life. And because of our weird IP laws, copyright,
Mm.
then you have to own the license in order to be able to make an iteration on a thing. I actually think to take the complete other side of this argument, if we could delete copyright from the world and
Mhm.
just, if you wanted to make a remake of Star Wars using the same script and the same music, but you thought you could do some like tiny twist, or
Yeah.
you had some little change that you wanted to make, you could use
Mhm.
the original footage, you could like whatever you like. If we just as a society accepted that once something was released, it was immediately in the public domain,
Yeah.
we would reach sublime new heights of artistic creativity.
I could see that. Some people do that. I mean, this is where YouTubers come in, where they say,
Mm.
"Look, screw your copyright. We're doing all of this. Anything creative, we're doing it." So that's why I got into mashup videos, because it's like I
Mm-hmm.
remember sometimes people would look at a mashup video and be like, "Wait, is that legal? Can you do that?" It's like, no, it's not legal. It's completely illegal. I just took these people. I took her voice, put it on that music. Like, I'm doing this. But like when it comes to Star Wars, people have remade the trailer for Star Wars, because like trailers were absolute garbage back in the day. They were super rudimentary. They had no idea how to
Mm-hmm.
build a good trailer. Now
Mm-hmm.
a guy can come in, some video editor could come in and create something that's really compelling and interesting and give a whole different vibe to the whole film. And that's just a small example of what new minds can do. But you're right, it's all dictated by business. And it's this is PG-13. We live in a PG-13 world where that's the
Mm-hmm.
number. You got to get the families in. You got to water it down, and so economics kind of controls everything. And that's, it impedes what we can do creatively, which is always frustrating for me.
Mm. Well, we've had a great discussion about movies, and I'm going to now sour it by giving it a score. I'm going to give you 15
My God.
arbitrary points.
Love it.
Psychology, elite theory, or theology?
What is elite theory?
There's a little cluster of thinkers, a lot of them Italian, who argued. I think it kind of descends from Machiavelli, and it's a very sort of cynical, realist take on human society, which says that, for example, there's always a small group of people who make all the decisions. So rule by the majority is literally impossible. And how does that dynamic play out in practice? How does power work?
So that was a very polite way of you being completely anti-Semitic. Is what I just heard. No, but that's I don't know much about it. But as far as theology and psychology, I mean, these are very interrelated as far as I can tell. But I'd go with psychology. To me,
Psychology.
It's more meat on that bone.
All right. Human beings are fundamentally rational.
Absolutely not.
Power corrupts. There you go. You can be anti-Semitic with me if you want. Or social media is psychologically harmful.
Let's go with the third one. I believe that there is a very good case to be made at this point because the data is in now where we can actually look at social media, not just the internet. It's this iteration of the internet is incredibly damaging. And the metrics to be used for that are kind of silent killers because you could look at depression stats, anxiety, suicide rates. They're all skyrocketing. Since the advent of the internet, they've all gone crazy up. But especially social media, you can see it with your own eyes, how damaging it is. I mean, I don't know if a day goes by where I don't see someone get killed on the internet. Like there's no filtration. Like we are absolutely in the Wild West, and psychological scarring is just happening all the time in real time. Harmful, absolutely, but also for more subtle ways. So it's like the time you spend on social media. It's actually not social. It's you're not being social. You're getting a mirage, a simulation of human interaction that you are actually not taking part in, and you're not tricking your spirit, or I don't know the proper word for it, but the game you're playing, the little shell game of like, oh, what are you talking about? I'm watching movies. I listened to a podcast. I saw a YouTube video. You were sitting behind a computer or a phone. You actually weren't doing those things. Your mind thinks you were. So you talk to a guy. Oh, I've seen 1 million pornos. My mind and body thinks I've had sex with 1 million girls. You haven't. You've been masturbating. You're a wanker. It's like, so there's a very dangerous game that we're playing with ourselves where it seems to be what we want, but it's actually not what we want or need. And people
said you were saying earlier, your mind is really all that matters. Is it just that the illusion is not good enough? If we could be genuinely fooled into thinking we're having these social interactions, would that be fine?
I think it's the opposite. We might be in an uncanny valley of some kind, but no, I think it's too good. I think it appears to it appears to scratch the itches that we have so well. Like the internet, this is my main problem with the internet. It does everything amazing. The porn, unbelievable. What do you want that you cannot find? The comedy, you like cat videos? Oh my God, you're in heaven. You like whatever you like, whatever you want to dork out about. You're a Star Wars geek? Go, you have countless hours to just delve into that. And it's so good at everything it does. It captures our attention. It makes us laugh. It shocks us. It outrages us. It does all the things good. But what are we losing? Well, we're losing these unspoken things that if it were the 80s and 90s, we simply would be doing something else. We would not be staring at a box. Maybe television. But even television wasn't that good. That's the difference. Television was very limited. You had X shows. You couldn't control the shows. They came on. Okay, I don't like anything that's on. I'm going to go outside. If television were like infinitely better in the 80s and 90s, we would have all suffered. There would have been more suicides. There would have been more loneliness. There would have been more of a loss. This comes at a cost, but the cost is almost forgotten because You're not thinking about the cost. You're like, oh no, I'm listening to this and I'm watching this and I'm distraction. And then after, when the smoke clears, you're like, why do I hate everything? Or what happened? Where am I? Why do I not have friends? Or like what's going on? And this is, we're sort of in the middle of it. And so there's no one way to navigate the internet, but I could safely say the average person is mangling it. And the stats reflect that. I'm not above this at all. I'm completely caught up in the never-ending, ceaseless entertainment and fascination that comes from this thing called the internet.
Yeah. If YouTube is a drug that's hurting people, does that make us dealers? Are we complicit in what's happening?
Inadvertently and not intentionally. It's not like, see, a lot of this stuff is outcomes that were not planned. And so we come back to the money incentive. So these companies that want your attention, they're just doing their jobs. So like Instagram and their reels, they're riveting. Have you ever rolled through these things? Each one, I could completely justify you watching that minute-long video. Like,
right, because it's only a minute. It doesn't take that much justification.
No, right, but there's 1,000 in a row that justify their existence. Put it this way. I just saw a clip of a flamingo feeding its child, regurgitating food into its child's mouth. Above that female flamingo is a male flamingo who has punctured the skull of the female flamingo. There's blood dripping from the brain stem of the mother flamingo, and it's dripping onto the baby flamingo as it eats the regurgitated food. Now, I just watched that. That's part of my day. Like, I wasn't hugging someone. I wasn't talking to someone. I was watching a flamingo kill its wife, and while feeding the child. It was insane. Then there's another clip, a reel of Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson talking about why he's Mike Tyson. Like, how did you become you? And he's like, well, when I was 10 years old, I was playing with my pigeons, and some guy snatched one of my pigeons, and he says, what are you going to do about it, you fat nigga? And then he ripped the head off the pigeon and threw the body back at me. And my friends were like, you got to fight him. You got to fight that guy. Now, listening to Mike Tyson talk about that story, it justifies itself. Like, I don't know what to say. The flamingo, how can you not look at this? The thing is, we are being bombarded. It's like you're a little bit thirsty. And so it's like, oh, I'm thirsty. I want water. Water's good. Okay, let's go uncork that fire hydrant. It has a lot of water, and it will quench your thirst, technically. But guess what? There's going to be some side effect. You're going to be overwhelmed with the flow of distraction, of information, of entertainment, of everything. And we don't know how to monitor that or oversee that or pull back, or there's no safeguard. It's just like, we're being bombarded constantly.
Jonathan Haidt's been on a podcast tour recently with basically this thesis. He seems kind of bullish that with a few rules, we might be able to save ourselves from social media. And he's talking about things like, don't let children have mobile phones till they're 14. Don't let them have social media till they're 18. Don't let them have phones in schools. You know, these little kind of tweaks he thinks would be enough.
Well, I like that he's talking about children. I mean, what about the people that are past that, and we're just a lost generation? Like, oh, we're screwed.
Yeah, he's like, it's too late.
Yeah, no, but that's a really good point. It's like, what is the societal rule for the age a child should have a phone or be given access? And why on earth would you want to make that younger? And the thing is, this is where the manual labor has to come in, and you have to say, look, because the kid's going to want to dive into all this distraction and fun and mayhem. And so you have to push back against that intentionally to rein that in. And yeah, I mean, I would totally agree that put it this way, it has to be discussed. We're barely discussing it. People are acting like all these things are independent. Like, why is there a loneliness epidemic? Why do people have less friends? Why is the suicide rate where it is? Why is everyone depressed? Like, no one's connected these dots, and it's like, maybe it's not just a series of coincidental individual events happening.
I'm just not sure that we as a society are capable of making a pivot. We're kind of like, I don't know, we're gambling addicts who are going down to the casino again, even though we, with the rational part of our brain, there's kind of alarm bells ringing, but we're compelled to our own doom.
Right, and it speaks to the product. It speaks to how good it is and what it does. It serves a purpose. The drugs, like I've never done drugs. I assume that if I took fentanyl or meth or heroin, it would feel a certain way that I would physiologically react to and then be controlled by. That's why I choose not to engage with it. But yeah, there's a power there, and you need to have a system in place, some sort of a hardwired regulatory oversight. And you're right. I don't think society has even come close to figuring this out. Not even close.
There's a take. Have you heard this idea that if you have rats in a cage and you give them no stimulus, and then you put cocaine in the water bottle, they will become addicted to it. Whereas if you give them like an environment in which they have other things going on, that the cocaine actually doesn't have any effect over them, and therefore things that are having these addictive effects, maybe literally drugs, but maybe the internet in general, pornography, all these things that people become addicted to, are actually more of a sign of the lack of meaning in the rest of their life. The problem is it's kind of getting rid of the addictive substance is to treat the symptom rather than the cause.
Yeah, there's a really good TED talk about that, where they're talking about the depression, and it's like the reverse of depression is not depression, it's connection and it's meaning.
Right.
And
yeah,
it's a British guy that did a good series on that. You're right. It's not. This is not just we need to stop doing X. We have to have interesting and meaningful engagement elsewhere. I think about a scene from Borat, the movie, where he's on a subway, I think in New York, and everybody that comes onto the subway, this guy pretends to be from a small town in Kazakhstan, and everyone who comes on, he would stand up and be like, "Hello, how nice to meet you," and he would offer his hand to, and it was like New Yorkers were like, "What are you doing? This guy's a complete psycho. Like you're gonna greet and address everyone on the subway." But you've been on the tube in London and every subway essentially, especially now. Everyone's on their phones. No one's talking, right? And so think of this prospect. You get on a subway, there's 20 people on there. You don't know any of them. And so you're like, well, I could sit here and exist in boring, like horrible nothingness, or I could pull out my phone and be, get all of my addictions and all the stimulus. And so you choose the phone. But let's say on that subway cart, you had 2-3 lifelong friends that you hadn't talked to in a couple of years. They were just sitting there. And you're like, well, maybe I should talk to them, or maybe I should talk to this new person and strike up a conversation. Maybe they'll judge me at the end of the conversation and give me a score as to how well it went. I mean, the point is we don't have that in a typical subway. So then we go, okay, well, I guess I'll just do the little crack box.
Yeah.
And it's like we stop searching for meaningful connection with human beings because the damn box is so much more appealing and has so much more to offer seemingly. But this trade-off, that formula that we are doing in our brain is actually not what we think it is. The answer we're giving ourselves is not the correct answer. I think we're slowly realizing that.
Yeah. Well, in order to protect your mental health, I'm going to give you 14.
Oh my God. I'm going to talk to my therapist about this whole event. This is
rather than smoothly segueing from topic to topic, I just abruptly cut the conversation off mid-flow, evaluate it, and then force you to pick one of my predefined topics to talk about.
Oh my God, Christology! What do you got here?
Yeah, so I don't. I'm not sure if you picked up about me or not, but I'm a Christian. So some of the topics I've put in here.
Hold on, let me dry heave. What? I'm a Christian, and the way you say it, it's so like out of the Crusades. I'm a Christian. Okay, well,
So if you want to talk about some deep
Well,
Christian theology, then you can
yeah,
pick Christology.
I'm a cultural Christian, so we have that in common.
Right. Yeah. Which is of course, the main thing about Christianity.
Right. And then let's talk Christology. I've never heard of that.
You want to try it?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
Okay. Jesus' teaching is easy to understand. Jesus' resurrection was more important than his ministry. Or Jesus was born of a virgin.
Good God. I kind of want to discuss all of them, but I mean, I'm going to, first of all, announce that I'm not even okay with the premise that there was someone named Jesus or that he existed.
Well, this is going to be a even more interesting round.
Yeah. So, I'll dive into the mythology of it all, but it's interesting that you've chosen these topics, and I would love to psychoanalyze you as to why these interest you. Jesus was born a virgin. First of all, I would say, who cares? Like, why would that be of any significance at all? Jesus was born of a virgin. In other words, what's the significance of that?
The significance of it, if you buy into the given reason, as in what does the Bible make of Mary's virginity, is that you've got the fall. Adam eats the fruit, and all of his offspring inherit original sin, which appears to be patrilineal, right? So because Jesus was not born of a human father, he's able to escape from the original sin.
But isn't that sort of, you're mixing the Old Testament with the New, and to kind of add credence to the obvious fairy tales in the Old Testament. I mean, I think that the Christians should stick to the newer stuff and just be like, but look, I don't understand why the virgin, first of all, I thought it was a mistranslation at some point where it was like,
it was a young woman.
Yeah, young woman. And it's like, so this whole thing is, and also the obsession with virginity, as if it's like, what if Mother Mary was, she'd been around a little bit. She'd had a couple relationships, a couple situationships. Who cares? What's the difference? The greater point is Jesus was just a kid, just a child. He's not
when Joseph discovers that Mary is pregnant, then he's going to divorce her because he jumps to the kind of obvious conclusion that she must have slept with another guy.
Right.
And I think it's reasonable to say that the modern approach to sex, where we view it as, well, I don't know, maybe you disagree. The modern approach where we think that you can just sleep with somebody and it will have no psychological effect at all is kind of crazy. Like maybe the conservative line that I go to, where I think sex should just literally be within marriage, you might think that's extreme in the other direction. But surely there is a certain amount of wisdom to the idea that sex is a fundamentally dangerous thing. If it's misused, you can end up with a lot of bad outcomes and damage.
Definitely, yeah. I completely agree with that. But I mean, we're talking about the ancient world here, and their views about sex and sexuality and female, virginity was very antiquated. So I don't know why we're glorifying and enshrining their obsession with virginity. Not to mention Jesus was a virgin. Like, what sense did that make? Like, seems a little bit crazy. Like, why did he not cash out on some of his popularity? I mean, like, I don't believe it. I also don't understand why it's really significant. And so it's like the whole thing is drenched in sin, and religion plus their views on sex are ripe for criticism, shall we say. So I don't understand that, but I also don't understand most of this stuff. So like Jesus' resurrection, that one, wow, what a parlor trick, and who cares? And also, what's the point of coming back to life if you're just going to leave immediately? Like, wow, thanks, Jesus. And Jesus, thanks for curing one leper and not leprosy. That was cool of you. I mean,
you think he should have stuck around? We should have like eternal
is insane
present Jesus through to today.
Also, look, these miracles, which, honestly are kind of pillars of why people believe in this. Like, if you ask
Mhm.
people, like, why do you believe in Christ? They, oh, he came back from the dead. It's like, okay, well, if I could establish for you that that's not true and you have no good reason to believe that, then what? Or if he didn't
Mm.
walk on water, if he didn't do all these things, what is the point of doing a bunch of magic tricks? And Hitchens made this point. If you could float or walk on water, then it would be you're David Blaine, or you are, so what? My point is, so what? You're not the son of God.
Yeah.
You're not the creator of the universe. It doesn't mean jack shit. I'm not connecting these dots. I'm not following the logic here. So
Mhm.
I understand that this story and this worldview might give you purpose and meaning. And there's dudes in the UFC who have Jesus strength. At the end of every fight, they're like, I just kicked this dude's ass because Jesus is Lord. And for them, it's inspirational. And they go to the gym and they work out because they're going to go live in heaven. And so I understand the placebo effect is real. I just don't understand how adult people who are smart, how on
Yeah.
earth could you buy into any of this obvious bullshit?
Well, as an adult person who
Yes,
is smart and
yes.
buys into it to the most extreme degree,
You
then
do? But
I open myself up to your examination.
yes, okay, but do you literally, or is it all sort of draped in metaphor and spirituality and some? I mean, you must be
No,
filtering something.
well, no. So I'm not in the Jordan Peterson camp
Oh,
of
thank God.
it's something, some clever linguistic game by
Mhm.
which we can talk about more sophisticated things. I'm a fairly straight down the line. The things that are depicted in the Bible are literally true. Um, and I I kind of run a subroutine in my brain all the time of
Yes.
like, what would I think about this if I was an atheist?
Yes.
So I feel like I can understand your perspective on me as
Okay.
being kind of like
Well, I mean,
wild and weird.
to your credit, you're doing it by the book. You're actually committing to the implications of what it is to be an actual Christian, as
Yeah.
opposed to
The
half-assing.
Yeah, well, yes, and the things that I think I would find equally difficult to grapple with if I was an atheist
Mhm.
would so I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. To me, you could imagine a universe where all of the same stuff was happening. Animals have evolved intelligence and they have self-preservation, and they, you can run all of the evolutionary arguments about why humans behave the way that they do, but none of that would produce the conscious experience that I'm having. There's no reason that I should have this really vivid personal experience of life.
Why not?
Not just that I exist and I behave the way that I do, but that
Mhm.
I've got this first person perspective, and it's so full of emotion and
Mhm.
significance, and uh, I think that is a a strong, to me, a
Mhm.
strong disproof of a completely material universe where you say it's all just maths, it's all just marbles in a marble run. The things that
Well,
I'm seeing with my very eyes
yeah.
show me that there is uh, a mystery to reality beyond just a bunch of physics.
Yeah, but for there to be mystery, I mean, this is goes back to the Dawkins book I just bought. He called the book "The
The God
Magic
of
of
Gaps
Reality."
stuff.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
The Magic of Reality is the name of the book.
Hmm.
In other
Hmm.
words, reality itself is complex and profound, but just
Hmm.
because it's very what you called mysterious doesn't mean we're going to God of the gaps this and be like, oh well, let me
Yeah.
just let me just crowbar in some ancient belief system to and daddy
Yeah.
figure to answer all these. And you hide behind consciousness. Maybe you hide behind the Big Bang, and be like, well, I don't understand this, so therefore God.
Mm.
And it's just like that's the oldest thought
Well,
process in the
it's
world.
I mean, the God of the Gaps phrase, I think, is quite clever. You could probably, if I thought hard, I could probably come up with the reverse, which is to say, as in, whenever there's something that gives me reason, whenever there's something that gives you reason to maintain your atheism, then you have sort of an atheism of the gaps.
What?
And
Wait a minute.
For example, junk DNA. For a long time, people were saying the fact that so much of our DNA is useless is exactly what you would expect if there was no designer. And it turns out that the DNA is actually mostly or almost entirely useful. Like it has some very complex purpose, but for a period there was a thing that made the atheist perspective on the world seem more plausible. So there was a sort of atheism of the gaps until science came along and you could run the same.
No, but you've skirted out of the burden of proof. So like, there's no one's maintaining atheism. This is a default position. I'm just not convinced.
Okay, this is something I'm interested to discuss.
Okay.
Why is atheism the default position?
It's the default of anything. I don't. You believe something. You have a set of beliefs and a set of truth claims that you are saying is something real and noteworthy, and you base your life around it. When explained to me, I am not convinced. I don't believe what you believe. You were told this by your parents, who are also Christians. I don't partake in this, and I don't agree with the belief that you are asserting. So like, my position of not believing your beliefs is not its own position that is comparable in any way. It's just me negating and saying I am not convinced by the complete lack of evidence that you've put forward as to why any of these things would be true. And the idea that you're sitting here saying I'm enamored with the fact that I am sentient and I have a brain and I feel things, therefore God. It's like, what? Dogs have that. Lizards have that. I don't. It's on a spectrum, and the brain has been studied only recently. I mean, we don't have full understanding of it all, especially consciousness. But just because that is awesome and complex is not. I do not simply then jump to Jesus as a virgin and the da 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 da. Like, what? Yes, brains are cool. We agree, brains are cool. But like, I don't get how you can just then use that as a piece of evidence to support Christianity.
Oh well, I mean, as Christopher Hitchens would always say, even if you get as far as theism, you have all your work still ahead of you.
I can remember him saying that. But see, this goes back to like you being raised Christian, with your parents, who I'm sure are practicing Christians. This is like this bond you have. And so for me to even challenge any of these views, it's like I'm sitting here going, your parents are dumb. And I don't believe, like, you're not going to see your beloved grandfather when you die. Like, I'm insulting you on such a primal level.
You maybe a lot of Christians would feel that way.
Yeah.
I used to.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm odd because I used to watch all of those debates back in the day. The Hitchens versus whoever, Dawkins versus whoever.
Yeah.
I used to really enjoy them. And
wait, and you watch those and you still are Christian after watching those? How?
Yeah.
Was the volume off? You had a John Williams score in the background? What happened? Duel of Faith.
Wait, in some ways, that's the reason I think it's so interesting to talk to you, because you were watching the same debates and enjoying them just as much as me. And at the end of every debate, we both finished concluding there we go. My own side won that.
I can't believe that. Yeah, I mean, I'm in disbelief about that. But the one thing that I would say to get to the heart of the issue in any religious debate, which I don't even do anymore, but like, my question to you would be, are you willing to acknowledge that you have a vested interest in these truth claims, that it's a conflict of interest? You want this to be true. I don't. Can you acknowledge that?
I think I can acknowledge that, and in some ways that, if we both admit that we're in the same position, right, where your like position of not wanting to believe it is a bias, and when you come to evidence, you have to overcome that bias, and me wanting it to be
No,
true,
but I don't.
it
I
is
don't. I
likewise
don't not
a
want to
bias.
believe it. I don't. You've just put that upon me. I'm saying
I,
I'm neutral in this.
I,
I
you,
don't.
I thought you said. I thought you said that. Are you saying
No, no, no.
you're ambivalent?
I'm,
You don't mind one way or the other?
yes, I'm complete. In fact, it's even worse. I wish it were true.
Do
So,
you?
like, of course, if you think you're going to live forever in
But then,
whatever way that means,
then why have you got such a gleeful and triumphant brand where you are
so,
celebrating
uh-huh.
atheism rather than
Well,
sort of
because
mourning the more like Nietzschean, God is
mm,
dead and we
right.
will, we'll never, wash the blood from our hands.
Well, because it's gallows humor. Because
Huh,
um,
interesting.
the only way to deal with the human condition is to laugh at it, but at least look at it and acknowledge it. I
Yeah.
believe in that there's a deep sense of human integrity at stake here. That if we are to just delude ourselves and give ourselves the
Mm,
happy sauce in the form of stories and promises and afterlife, and oh my God, I mean, at some point we have to grow up as a species and confront the situation as it is, which is, by the way, already awesome and miraculous and amazing. Like, it's not like we are in a boring situation, the reality of it. So the idea that we'd have to make
mhm,
stuff up just to sort
mm,
of grind out our lives with some sense of false optimism, or I guess, the true believer, it's not a false optimism. They actually believe this stuff. But like,
mm,
you don't think I would want to live forever or have everyone I love go on in whatever way, you know, the Christians think that's going to happen? Like, of course,
mm,
this is like the instinct to survive on crack. It's just like,
mm,
I'm going to formulate a worldview that protects me from my horror when it comes to facing mortality.
mm.
So I understand the reason it exists. It's just, I can't buy into it. It's just not true. But then again,
Mm,
this is, and go back to Jordan Peterson. A question I'd have for a Christian is, do you care what's true? And
mm.
honestly, do you honestly care what's true? Because I think if people were super honest, they'd say, no, actually, I don't. And they'd come up with
I,
something. This is true for me. This is
yeah,
my truth.
yeah. I think that I do place a very high value on truth, and I do genuinely believe that after considering all the evidence that my my opinion about,
Mm.
my view on truth lines up with the evidence rather than having to blind myself to it. But I will acknowledge that um,
So,
there's a significant bias. I will say
yes,
I want to come to the conclusion that I have, and that
right.
makes my conclusion sort of suspect.
Hugely.
I don't think it makes it invalid, but it does
Oh my,
mean you have to raise a
put
flag
it
of
this way.
like
If you
check it.
were if you were brought to court, you would be excused as a witness. They'd be like, objection. This person is completely, there's a conflict of interest. They have totally biased. Get him out. His testimony means nothing here. So, if I were to establish for you that your beliefs are not true, simply not true,
Hmm.
that would change everything for you?
Well, if so, let's distinguish a couple of things, right?
Mhm.
So when I watched those debates, there were certainly times, I was probably a teenager at this point. I was kind of at a prime age to decide to go against my parents in a way.
Mhm.
And there was definitely moments where somebody would present something in the debate that I didn't have a good answer to. Um, and I thought of myself as a very rational person, but I was confronted with, huh, I actually think that argument is pretty watertight and disproves God's existence in some way. And
Right.
and then so then the question is, what happened to me in the time between that moment
Mhm.
and when I then eventually went away and thought about it and came up with a plausible response that I was happy with. And I would say, and this will in some ways be grist to your mill, I think, but
Mhm,
I,
mhm.
I maintained my belief in God even though I had encountered this seemingly
Yes.
compelling counter argument to my faith.
And that
And I think
was
that is interesting.
why, in
Because that
part, why are you doing that? Because you are wanting to keep the party going. You like what your
maybe.
faith does for you. You prefer
Mm.
a world in which this were true. So you just sort of go that direction
Yeah, and
anyway.
well, there's probably a kind of, in a way, a higher order decision-making process, which says that, and I think all humans probably run this to some degree, I'm not going to change my view on very deeply held and important things at the drop of a hat. So when I encounter something that's like a big red flag about something I believe, I'll take it seriously and remember to come back and reconsider and talk to people about it. But I won't
Okay.
actually. There's a, these kind of logical flaw, these little maths puzzles where people prove that 1 equals 2, right?
Yeah.
They do some kind of sleight of hand stuff.
Right.
And when you encounter something like that, you kind of have the experience of, well, that's very clever. It's like a magic trick. I
Mm,
don't know where the sleight of hand was in the algebra,
right.
but I'm not going to buy your conclusion that 1 equals 2 until I've like very thoroughly checked. So
Well,
I live in this kind of ambiguity until then.
yeah, these religious conversations, it's weird because they can get sidetracked on so many things. And,
Uh,
like going into the details of like creationism or the age of the
uh,
earth or Noah's Ark. Like, so for example,
mhm.
do I have to argue with you about Noah's Ark? Do you believe in Noah's Ark?
Yeah.
Come on. Come on. Seriously.
Well,
Jesus.
you were ready to.
I was ready to
I sort of
concede. Okay.
yeah. Well,
But that's
look,
why.
I
Okay.
I'll
So
go one further
yeah.
because um I'm 50-50. You might you might conclude shortly that I'm not actually smart, and that is the answer to the
Not at all.
question.
Not at all.
But I am 50-50 on the creationist question. I kind of, so
Mm,
my take on how, if you were to get in a time machine and go back many years,
right.
hundreds of thousands of years, what would you see? And I kind of am of the opinion that I don't think it's enormously obvious the correct way to read the Bible, in that, those early chapters of Genesis could plausibly be read poetically. But I'm also extremely suspicious of the scientific consensus,
Mm,
in that, well, I guess this goes along with a general suspicion of a lot of consensus um,
mhm,
apparatus in society. And I don't know, in some ways, I don't know which of these suspicions came first, but I'm not buying a lot of the climate apocalyptic alarmism in the
mhm,
same way. It's kind of, I sense motivated reasoning, and I kind of feel the same way about the conclusions from science about the origin of the world and of humanity starts with the premise of there's no divine intervention. And so I
mhm,
think they end up producing, this is the best explanation for how the world would have come about if there had not been divine intervention. And then I'm like, okay, but I think there may have been divine intervention. So how much of what you've concluded should I throw out?
mm.
If it's possible for a god to come and do something enormous and miraculous, that puts a lot wider error bars on some of some of your scientific papers, if you see what I mean.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, you've obviously thought about every aspect to this, and you go back to the core of it and the assumption of divine, intelligent design or something. But I mean, again, it's the burden of proof. You have to establish that, and if
Mm.
science, I mean, I don't know how you've navigated science and the conflicts that it's going to present to you on every front, from the age of the earth to, I mean, this is why I have a kangaroo as my avatar, was because of the debate between Bill Nye and what's his name? That Christian.
Ken Ham.
Yes. And he asked, he said, if you believe in Noah's Ark, how did kangaroos get to Australia and why? And why have we not seen a single skeleton of a kangaroo in between Israel and Australia? And he's like, they talk about they floated on logs. They jumped off in Thailand onto a log and it went to Australia. Like, the amount of stuff that they have to go through to make this work. And this is one comical example, but like, I brought up Noah's Ark so that we could avoid that and get to something of more substance.
You thought
you'd
hit dry land, to coin a phrase.
And Richard Dawkins had this conversation with Mehdi Hassan where he goes, look, I trust that you don't believe that Muhammad was ascended to the heavens on a flying horse. And he goes, no, I do.
Went over the moon or whatever. Yeah. Well, that's I mean, there's a,
So where's the common ground? How are you alive in 2024 and this is your worldview? Like, I don't understand. Help me. Is your, look, what is the payoff here? You want to live forever? You're afraid of death? Like, what is the selling point of religion for you? Because if I were to tell you, what if you acknowledge Jesus is a guy? He was a rabbi. He was just some guy. He wasn't born of a virgin. He didn't perform any miracles. He didn't rise from the dead. What changes for you? Like, you still have the 10 Commandments. You still have the Golden Rule, all the morality, all the, like, what, you know what I'm saying? Like,
well, I want to push back a little bit on the assumption that I'm just using motivated reasoning, because I still do fundamentally think that I have sought what is true over what is expedient, and I will say that there are attractive things about my. So, as I acknowledged my bias in that I do get a lot of those benefits you were talking about. I believe that I will live forever in an eternal bliss, and I think of another. But then, is that more crazy to believe than that there will one day be a moment when there is no conscious beings alive and the universe just continues to exist forever without observers? Like, that's an equally crazy thing to wrap your head around.
Well, that's already been the case for billions of years, but I mean,
well, it's what I'm saying is that when you push to these extremes, the human mind just kind of can't process, regardless of what your belief system is.
It's hard,
but I'll tell you one thing that is very powerful to me. And again, I don't want this to be, I have formed my conclusions based on what I want to be true. But nonetheless is something that I would find very difficult if I was an atheist. And I think you detect it actually in a lot of the new atheists that we've talked about, is the inability to lean on objective moral judgments about the universe. So if you read Dawkins, he's to my mind wants to slightly have his cake and eat it. He wants to both say that there is at root nothing but mindless indifference, that all of our moral judgments are completely subjective and the result of culture. This is the conclusion you have to come to if you're an atheist, is that the things that we think of as right and wrong are just the produced behavior within us as a result of the need to reproduce. So fine, like, it's admirable to follow your to follow your conclusions to their logical ultimatum. But then there's also there is a funny Dawkins calling himself a kind of cultural Anglican, because there is something of the fire and brimstone preacher in him when he then tackles things that he is morally abhorred by, when he comes up against something that upsets him in his moral core, then I don't believe that he is at that moment maintaining his belief in the arbitrary subjective nature of morality. And I think it's actually very difficult for a human being to look at something like, a rape or a murder, or something really horrible that a human does, and not to believe that there is a deep good and evil in the universe.
Yeah, but I don't think any of this is a problem. I mean, yes, rape is bad, murder is bad. I don't believe in God. The end. I mean, this is a spectrum. You talk about objective morality. There is none. I mean, yes,
well, there is.
How? Where?
When you encounter somebody who is a crazy psychopath, who is self-justified in their murdering, you don't really believe that their assessment of their behavior is equally as valid as yours, and you have a sort of polite disagreement.
No, right. I could produce a logical, reason-based argument as to why certain behaviors are better than others. All of it loosely based on the golden rule. But, this is not a case for religiosity or Christian belief or anything. It's just common sense.
But the point is that your justification would have to be pragmatic. Like, we need to have rules in order to
it's based off
live better societally or whatever.
I
think I bet though you still deep down feel the force of those moral judgments more deeply than is justified by your worldview.
No, why? I don't need to defer to some other spirit or power to get an intuition as to what is right and wrong. And honestly, you go to some obvious examples like rape and murder bad. There's a lot of gray zone stuff that no one agrees on. And so you talk about war crimes. Like I'm diving into like the bombings of Dresden and Hamburg, and like, was Britain justified in doing that? They were killing civilians. Is that a war crime? Isn't that bad? Objectively, subjectively, like any way you want to cut it. And it's like, well, wait a minute. The Nazis bombed London for a year, killing civilians. Those were all war crimes. So if your opponent is committing war crimes against you, are you then justified to commit the same war crime against them if they are the ones that started it? These are questions that you're not going to get from on high. No one's going to tell you the right answer to that. These are to be discussed, to be fleshed out.
It's a bit like the trolley problem type stuff, right? There's these kind of edge cases within ethics, but I think of morality like fundamentally as being a relational thing where it. Like, okay, if you go to extremes, you find interesting conversation, but in day-to-day life, full well when somebody has done something wrong against you, and it's not you don't have a feeling of that's subverted a societal norm that I can explain. You have a feel, like you describe it as right and wrong,
right? But it's not magic, and it's not some universal truth that is echoing throughout eternity. It's a feeling based off a logical intuition I would have. And again, it's common sense. How you guys parlay this into the belief in the supernatural and into religion is unbelievable to me. I mean, like, you recognize there are moral, good atheists. You don't need religion to be moral. And like right. And so like,
yeah.
And you recognize that even within Christianity, there's a million disagreements on what is the right thing.
And indeed, there are many very evil Christians. I'll grant that as well.
Exactly. So why even delve into this when you and I recognize we're very similar? We agree on all this stuff. Like, what do we even disagree on when it comes to morality?
I think either way, whether you believe in a faith in 2024 or you are an atheist, there are corners of your world that produce some cognitive dissonance, and are a little unintuitive and
Like what?
feel like. So in the case of a Christian, as you would be, you'd be very quick to list.
Sure.
You've got the
Science.
the contradiction seemingly between,
Mhm.
so whichever faith tradition, let's say Christians specifically, right? The
Mm.
Bible says lots of stuff that is seemingly in contradiction to evidence, and there's all
Well,
kinds of experts who will come
yeah,
and say,
not true.
this
Right.
is not true,
It also
um,
contradicts itself several thousand times, which I'm sure you're aware.
and you could do intertextual analysis,
Yes.
and yeah, and I would say that's I mean, of course, I've got my own ways of reconciling texts, but I won't deny that there are bits of the Bible that are extremely tricky and thorny, and in some
Ah,
ways,
like
it's,
like a thorn of
it's
crown,
very.
a crown of thorns. Um, now that I have a
So,
Christian with me, yeah,
yeah, go
I
no,
had a
go ahead.
question. Just while I mean, you seem to be an expert in all this. Jesus Christ,
Cool.
is he of Nazareth or of Bethlehem?
Yeah, so he's a Nazarene because he grew up in Nazareth.
Okay, so
He
he's
was born
born
in
in Bethlehem.
Bethlehem. Yeah, and there was prophecy saying that somebody would be born in Bethlehem.
Okay,
So, I mean, again, to put on my atheist hat, which I
yeah.
suppose would be a fedora, presumably.
Ha!
Sorry, that
So,
was
so
a low blow.
yeah,
But
Jesus. Well,
people will say that the census never happened, and the reason that the gospel writers
mm,
put it in the Bible was because they wanted to artificially make Jesus' birth line up with some Old Testament prophecy.
I see.
And
Uh,
there's another idea of Nazarite, which is different from Nazarene. So, like Samson, for example, was a Nazarite.
huh.
Do you remember Samson? He was the guy who couldn't cut his hair or he would lose his
Right.
strength.
Of
And that was
Exodus.
a Nazarite vow where they take a vow not to cut their hair as a sign of their devotion to God.
Huh. Interesting.
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and then the frankincense. What does one do with that? What's, what was the point of that?
The
Some,
three gifts, right? The
yeah.
wise men bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Okay.
And people think there were three wise men, but there was three gifts. Really, there's probably a bunch of wise
Oh,
men.
I just got into a talk about the validity of whether Jesus existed, and I was like, "What evidence do you have outside of the Bible?" And some guys like, "Well, there was some sort of ancient historian who talked about Jesus like once or twice. Like they found some scripture somewhere of like a guy had jotted down the name Jesus at one point.
Yeah, there's probably a hand. I think you can find references to Jesus' existence outside of the Bible. There's
Very few.
there's a few Roman
And it's
historians who mention there was a miracle worker at the time. There was and then of course you've got people talking about the Christians, and they're
mhm,
like, who are, what do you mean Christians? Oh, well, they followed this guy who died a few years back. Um, but
yeah.
I mean, yes, I think you can construct. We probably don't have time to discuss it during the
Sure.
stream, but you can construct quite an interesting historical case about Jesus's
Well, honestly,
life from
it's
a skeptical perspective. I think
I
you
would
can
like
do it.
I found it interesting just as a historical perspective because he's such an important figure, mythical or
Mm,
not, that it's just of some interest. But like even if he
yeah.
did exist, it doesn't mean he did miracles or that he's son of God or that there is a God. None of that follows. So I'm not. It's not
Hmm.
even that compelling. Like even if the answer is yes, he did exist. But
Right.
you are such a fascinating character because I feel like I'm in a time machine. Like I feel like I'm talking to some British monk from the 1400s or something. Like I I'm not sure how you seem to be sitting on this Jenga game of cognitive dissonance in your
Yeah.
life that you're balanced atop of, and you have not fallen from the structure that you have created. And it's like it's mesmerizing.
Yeah.
I'm like, how? Like I
Well,
thought.
I will say, and in some ways, I'm maybe answering the question in a way that's not like in my own best interest, but
Mhm,
I think human beings are incredibly good at post hoc rationalization. It's almost like a
mhm.
superpower. So
Yeah.
if you can, I saw a study about this where people were told that they had said something, and they were asked to explain
Why they
why
said
they
it.
said it,
Yeah.
and they all, pretty much every single person, came up with a reason rather
Mhm.
than disputing that that's what they'd said, and the thing that they'd been tricked into believing that they had said made
Right.
no sense. So that the reasons were all kind of wild, but I think what's interesting is that they all completely believed what they were saying. Um,
Yeah. No,
s-
we're
s-
definitely. I mean, look, I sit here and talk to you about this issue as if like, oh, this is all settled and it's not even in doubt. But like, you represent the side that most of humanity, in one way or another, believes in currently, let alone all throughout
mm,
history. So it's,
mm.
you don't have to sit there and obviously humans are prone to think the way you think, and it obviously does something for them. But
You are
like,
the aberrant thinker in this
yes, I'm the
situation.
heretic. But it reminds me of the life of Brian, which is, I saw early on, and they're following Brian around. They're like, "You're the Messiah," and he's like, "I am not the Messiah." And he goes, "Will you piss off?" And they're
Very
like,
naughty boy.
"Yeah." And they go, "Only the true Messiah would deny his divinity." And he goes, "Okay, fine,
Wow.
I am
Yeah.
the Messiah." And they go,
Well,
"He is the Messiah."
have you seen the new June movie? It's kind of got a similar idea in it.
Which one? June?
The June 2, right?
Oh, Dune. Oh, yeah,
The
yeah. I have.
Dune, sorry.
Mhm.
I was using my British accent against you. Um, it's got the same thing where there's a character called Stilgar who, whatever happens, he takes it as more evidence that Paul
Right.
Atreides
He's a
is
believer.
the Messiah.
He's
And of
Morpheus.
course, Frank Herbert was making kind of an atheist argument in his
Mhm.
books, because he establishes that the religious belief of the Fremen was seeded by the Bene Gesserit. So he's taking explicitly
Yeah.
religious Christian language,
It felt like it.
putting it
Yeah.
inside his fictional world, and explaining it in a secular way, which is quite an interesting rhetorical tool
Yeah,
that I
I
noticed.
mean, I've seen a lot of the Jesus story sort of infiltrating into other stories being told, and, it's everywhere. I mean, we're swimming in it. It obviously does
Mm.
something for people. It makes them feel a certain way. It's just
Mm.
I can't help
It
but roll
doesn't
my
work on
eyes.
you.
No, God. But I mean, there's so many holes to poke. It's just you know.
Well, but in some ways, um,
Mm,
just to try to explain how the conversation looks from my perspective,
yeah.
um, when I point to something like consciousness, or the deep feeling that morality is real, that we both agree we experience,
Yeah.
and that is something that is, for an atheist, and it's something that needs explaining. There's the kind of intuitive, immediate thing that a child would go to, which is good and evil have actual, real existence in the universe. And then you kind of grow up enough in an
Mhm.
atheist worldview, and you overcome that childish belief. You're confronted with the superior viewpoint about these things. So when I bring those up, then you sort of bat that away as as a childish argument. Um, but then when you bring up something like Noah's Ark or whatever,
Mhm.
I I feel the exact same thing in reverse. It's like that to you feels like one of a million knock down arguments against my worldview, and I'm somehow kind of fighting my way through. Whereas from my perspective, these things that are really vividly in my face about the way that reality feels lines up with a religious worldview. And then there's these little picky things that people bring up about, like, oh, this textual inconsistency, or no, or, you know, can you really believe in Noah's Ark or whatever? And I'm like, well, it's those things feel petty and small to me. Like, when I consider the strength of the things in favor of religion and then these arguments against, what I'm trying to communicate is is more the kind of experience of being religious versus being an atheist, is that when I encounter the arguments from atheists, especially more recently, because obviously I've been, you know, I've been around a lot of these arguments so many times that I just intuitively feel like that's a weak argument, and I've got a good answer for it. So I don't feel like I'm sitting on top of a Jenga tower. Whereas when I think about an atheist, I have the exact same thing you were describing, where I'm like, how can you live day to day in the contradiction that you are a human being experiencing reality through a deeply, you know, a deeply spiritual lens, where you encounter the beauty of music, the evil of terrorism, and you somehow maintain your view.
But it's called being a human. I mean, religious people, classic move where you commandeer spirituality, which is, I would never grant you that. So if I'm affected by music and I have emotions, now that's, I'm a religious, I'm a Christian. No, doesn't mean any of that. So just like, oh, you believe that there's good and bad things in life? Oh, well, you're a Christian. You believe? No, I don't. That's, again, a human impulse, an intuition that we have been instilled with biologically for a series of reasons that Dawkins could probably point out to you. There are certain social norms that there's an anthropological reason as to why this is seen as a good thing or seen as a bad thing. So I would never. I
could probably do a good job of representing Dawkins' perspective on most of these topics.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I understand the atheist position, and I'm not trying to argue you into my perspective so much as that sort of for your own interest of, like,
no, I'm
how
just
does
getting
it feel to
an
be
idea,
religious,
right? We're talking about the way in which the conversation even feels from each other's perspective. But, like, for example, if I were to talk to you about what you call as a petty thing, which is also, you know, just an absolute kill shot to religious, like, so there's so many to go through that it's like dizzying. But, like, if I were to say to you, Noah, like, Noah was what, 800 years old, something like that.
Yeah, there was after in the Bible it describes that after the flood, the length of man's days was limited to 120 years. But before that, you've got people living for wildly longer times. Yeah.
And didn't Noah, like, sleep with his children, or his children slept with each other? Like, that's
he had three of his sons on the ark, and from that, you know, small family unit repopulates the entire
with three
face
sons
of the earth.
That seems a bit
well, no, three sons and their wives. So theoretically they had three sets of children who must have then interbred with each other,
right? So we're all inbred from them. Or they're not Adam and Eve, but whatever splinter group that was.
Well, but interestingly, there's this idea of mitochondrial Eve.
Yes.
You've presumably come across. But of course, it should really be mitochondrial Noah's wife, because there was a later choke point. Yes,
exactly. So, but if I were to say to you something very basic, like, humans don't live to be 800, and it's not even close, and there's no reason to think that would be true, you would somehow kung fu that into the recesses of, like, not mattering to you. Like, I don't.
Well, okay. You've got kind of two. You've probably noticed that there's two religious mindset, like two approaches to dealing with this kind of question,
Uh-huh.
one group of people will say, well, God can do anything, and therefore your question is meaningless, right?
Sure.
Then there's the other side, which is probably more well represented by the kind of Ken Ham approach, which
Uh-huh.
I simultaneously find very cringe and embarrassing, but also
Mm.
kind of fascinating. So there's a really interesting take on this that I share more for your fascination
Okay.
than as something I buy into, right?
Mm.
But where did so there's a verse in Genesis 2 that says that there was no rain at the time, but God
Uh-huh.
sent springs of water to water the ground, and that's so the plants were not watered from above. And
Mm.
then you get, obviously, the flood happens and the waters recede, and you have presumably more or less modern day continents. So there's an idea that prior to the flood there was an additional canopy of water
Mhm.
surrounding the earth, and that God brought that canopy of water down during the flood. And before the flood, this canopy of water was protecting mankind from
Mm.
cosmic rays.
I
And
see.
therefore, it was the canopy of water that allowed people to live
Right. I
till
mean, and not
hundreds
to
of years
take it
later.
hyper literal, but like there's still cellular decay and entropy, and we just know from studying the origin of humanity that that's not how humans lived, and there was
Yeah, you
lifespans.
could say
But
it's not cosmic rays, but like primarily the age of an
right.
animal breaks down because of like the Hayflick limit, or
So, and I'm aware
yeah.
that each one of these discussions,
Mm,
it's a truth claim, and it could be
mm.
small, and in its entirety, it's not like the beginning and end of it all. But there's so many of
The
those. But
cumulative case.
but you speak to this other thing of like the feeling. I have this innate sense of the truth
Mm,
of my belief, and so
mm,
I would ask you, because you've stated a few different things. What
mm,
percentage do you lean into each of these things in terms of how much they convince you? And to
mm,
list a few, you talked about
mhm.
good and evil, having
Yeah.
an objective idea that there is good and there is evil. That to you points to the existence of God, and
Mhm.
and it gives you some sort of reassurance that Christianity is the way, the truth, somehow, because there is
Yeah.
such a thing as good and evil as a concept.
Well, and you
For
mentioned one, which is the historical evidence of the resurrection, right? You said
right, right. So
a lot of people lean on.
and
Yeah.
I'd ask you that, why how what percentage is it of Jesus Christ and his resurrection? And then
Yeah.
what percentage of it is um your wish or desire or promise to
Mhm.
live forever?
And
So in other
I'll
words,
give you
yeah,
I'll give
what's
you a couple of
the pie
other
chart?
ones, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and not what I've actually thought about. So this will be a little bit off the top of my head.
Uh-huh.
I'd also say another thing that gives me confidence is that the um, I over time have found the perspective of the Bible to be um, wise and
Okay.
uh, helpful, and so I guess how do you class that as a form of
But
evidence? I think it
but that
just adds to the plausibility that it is a divine document, because I actually think
but that's just a
it
positive
has
book review. I mean,
it is it's a great book.
but okay, so then I would add another
Okay, I
category.
think it's
So
still significant in that if it fell apart on closer
uh-huh.
inspection, um, then it would be less likely that it's very surprising that a document that's that old is that relevant to our modern life, I would
Okay.
say.
Well, you make it relevant. It doesn't have to be. It's not relevant to my
Okay.
life. Okay, but you've seen
Uh,
the,
but,
the
uh, yeah, yeah,
you've
okay.
seen the graph of,
I think you have imported a lot of Christian ideas
I'm a
into
cultural
your
Christian,
life.
right?
Yeah.
Well, of course, you guys commandeer everything. You take credit for everything. You take credit
I
for the
will.
golden rule. You take credit for if I feel something during a song. Okay, but
The first recorded evidence of the golden rule is Jesus saying it. Now the silver rule was yes, okay, Buddha or whoever.
I'm sure he adopted it from some. I mean, people knew to not be a dick before Jesus. But okay, you've seen the graphic where it talks about the contradictions in the Bible, and it's like a rainbow of like 1,000 lines going from one a book to another, saying like, here it says this, here it says this. These two things cannot coexist. So there's so many contradictions in the Bible, but I would put the Bible as an entire category as to something that adds to your belief. And the Bible
Sure.
is a compilation of books. So it's a book made by
It's a library.
people
Yeah.
you don't know. You don't know who wrote this stuff. And you're also aware of the way in which the Bible was selected. So like the whatever version, what got in, what was left out. And so that the arbitrary nature of that process, you're aware, is man-made. That doesn't faze you.
So,
and you don't know who wrote the thing. But how much of a book that you don't know the author of is the reason you believe, is my question.
I think it's substantial. I guess
Right.
this is an interesting exercise. So I don't know what percentage off the top of my head to give these things, but I think
is it a third, a third? Like
maybe the Bible as a okay. If I was to break it down into thirds, then it would be like my personal experiences that would include like any religious experiences I've had, what I was talking about, the feeling of morality and consciousness, the beauty of music, all of these things that sort of, the feeling that you have when you pray, for example. I think that all of that, like, let's group that and call that a third.
Okay. And what about when a Buddhist prays or a yoga person is meditating? Sam Harris is meditating. He feels a certain way.
Yeah. So if I had nothing else to go on but that third, then I'd obviously be missing quite a lot of detail.
Right. So,
I didn't know how convincing it would be. In a way, you only have to pass the threshold of it's a better explanation than the alternatives. You can't just. Well, I suppose the agnostics live in the sort of I don't know, so I won't believe anything. But realistically, you have to have a belief, I think.
I have a weird question for you.
Something or nothing. Yeah.
It's your belief in Jesus and the power you put into this figure and the story of him. I know that's all you're getting, all of that from the Bible. But do you ever think of your relationship to Jesus outside of the context of, oh, this is stuff I read about from a book I don't know the author of?
Are you asking about, like, if I
do you have a personal relationship with
Jesus,
or conception of him that is outside of the fact that he's a character from the Bible?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to answer your questions as honestly as I can.
Good.
So I would say my primary experience of God in a day-to-day way is much more just praying to God. And I if I think a bit harder about it, I have got views about the Trinity and the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and what they say is you pray to God the Father through the Holy Spirit in the name of Jesus, and so I probably will have fleeting thoughts about that in a day-to-day way. For example, if I pray for something, I might finish the prayer with you must have heard phrases like "in the name of Jesus," something like this. In Jesus' name, yeah. Right. And the significance of that is kind of like if a guy comes with an instruction and it's from the king, and it's like, in the name of the king, I command you to do this. So when I am praying for something, then I am kind of like alluding to Jesus as in a kingly role. So in a way, I think of Jesus in a little bit the same way as I might think of King Charles,
Okay.
a figure who has some regal significance, although King Charles is a bit of a bad example because the
Sure.
monarchy in the UK doesn't mean very much these days. But
Hmm.
in a much more real sense, Jesus is on the throne, I guess.
Okay.
Um,
And while
but
you're having these prayers, you are actually feeling that you are in touch with an entity, a spirit, a force. You are actually in communication with Jesus.
well, yeah. So that's why I'm slightly in the weeds here. But
Mhm.
some Christians, it's really interesting. If you listen to Christians pray, there's these little filler words that people will put in. I tend towards praying like Father. That's or God. Those are the
Okay.
words that kind of come to my lips. As in, who am I addressing? My heavenly Father, or
Yeah.
the Creator of the universe?
I guess.
And I do have a genuine belief that the things that I think are
Uh-huh.
being sort of, you might say, monitored, right?
So it is being heard.
Hitchens would say
Okay.
a celestial North Korea who's
Exactly.
watching for thought crimes. But yeah, I do genuinely have a like a deep and true belief that
Uh-huh.
when I pray things, that intention, that like communication is
Yes.
being fully received by some sort of person,
Uh,
and indeed that person has great power. And if I pray for something to happen
mhm.
and it is in alignment with his will, which you might say is a get out, but let's
Sure.
avoid that
Mysterious ways.
conversation. Yeah, but I think things can happen that are genuinely miraculous that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have prayed for it. But also,
Right.
the other half of the relationship is more like, I think of my life as being something that is outside of my control and a potential source of anxiety,
Mhm.
that I might be going through pain, and I might have a difficult decision to make. And in some
Mm.
ways, the comfort of prayer is that I can bring these things to somebody who is fully in control and fully understands everything. So yeah,
Yeah.
there is a great comfort
Well,
in that belief
I
and
could see
practice.
the comfort. I could see it as a self-soothing practice, but it could also just be
Mm.
something that you're doing inside your own mind that is
Yeah,
meant to help you in some way. I mean, and also you've set up a system that is unfalsifiable. So every prayer you make, answered or
yeah.
not, it's not going to affect you. So I mean, does that
Mm.
alarm you at all, or speak to the
Well,
validity of the whole thing?
it would alarm me if my experience of prayer and its effects was kind of um, a single source of belief, as in, um, I I think of I do have some of those thoughts that you're describing, where you go,
Uh-huh.
well, what if this is all just in your head, and it, as you say, it's all unfalsifiable. It could all not be true. And I think
Right.
I think I am happy to admit that that nothing, in a deep philosophical way, no conclusion we come to is ever 100% solid. So
Mm.
I don't think you would disagree with this either, right? That your conclusion of atheism is only like you. You'd probably use a phrase like, you know, it's as it's as certain as anything else I
Yeah.
know in
Right.
existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd
It's
say the same
contingent
thing about
upon.
my religious views. Is like, I believe in God more
Uh-huh.
strongly than anything else, but I also admit that it's not like a mathematical proof where I get to the
Yeah.
bottom of it and go, well, then it's
Well,
100% certain.
I run into this thought process in another field that I'm getting more into now, which is UFOs. And
Mm,
there's a whole group of people that want there to be aliens and UFOs, and
mm,
they're open about it. They admit it. I want to believe. It's like it's a catchphrase for X Files. And
yeah,
the way in which that plays into how they ascertain new video, or assessing the probability that there are UFOs or aliens, mixed with their desire for there to be aliens, it
hmm,
becomes a very muddy situation that you have to kind of
mm,
sift through. And
yeah.
of course, the
But
interesting part.
you can't always disbelieve everything that you want to believe. Sometimes there is an alignment between your wish for something to be true and reality. Like, it can
Well,
happen.
the thing is, I'm somewhat sympathetic to the idea that if you were to tell me, look, the situation of being a human is so grim, if we were to just look at it and stare at it and accept it for what it is, that we have to come up with something to make us wake up and go through our day. We have to fill our life with meaning, or give ourselves some form of hope. I mean, it could be as, you guys are into some goofy magical stuff, but like
Yeah.
Harry Potter, like people like to believe it's more positive. It's like, can we please not
Mm,
be sinking on the Titanic of our lives as mortal beings? Can we at least play the violin? Can we at least
yeah.
pretend like there's
Yeah.
something more? Like, so I can understand that sort of desperate. It's very tragic, actually, because
Mm.
like the worldview that you must think I believe, it must appear so dark and pointless.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, whose cope is more pitiable, I suppose, making a bunch of grim YouTube videos or attending church every week?
Right, but that's the thing. I mean, atheists aren't grim and just waiting to die and like, oh, nothing means anything. Our life
Yeah,
is filled with
yeah.
merriment and
That was
and joy and
that was
Mhm.
a joke, really, rather than an
Yes,
actual comment.
accusation.
Um, to come back to your pie chart, I'd
Uh-huh.
probably say so. The first third being religious experiences,
Mm,
and I would say, um, I, you know, probably if I had nothing else but that third, would still be in the broad
mhm.
and slightly embarrassing new agey subculture of there's something out there,
Right.
there's
Don't know what it
there's
is.
a some woo spirituality
Uh-huh.
without a label, rather than atheism. So I kind of think that third is enough to support something religious, but not specifically Christianity.
I mean, people
Um,
love magic. I mean, we it is more interesting. It's more colorful. It's half of the fiction that we come up with. It's always infused with magic and supernatural stuff and fantasy and sci-fi. And it's like it's something greater than our
well,
experience. And
I think the atheist viewpoint is so unintuitive that I'm not sure anybody fully actually deeply believes it. I know
what?
that's going to sound like a
How many?
stupid thing for me to
I mean,
say,
I
because
would say it's the
you're
exact
like, I'm
opposite, but
looking at my own brain, and
yeah,
but that's just in a way the fascinating thing about this conversation, because
yeah,
in a lot of ways we are similar. We've
hmm,
like we've experienced a lot of the same culture and arguments, and we think in, I think, quite a similar way, and yet
sure.
have come to such diametrically opposite places in the end.
But
But
like,
to me, the idea that you can actually think that
uh
the world is just a bunch of atoms bouncing around,
yeah,
and
but it's
that like experiences are all emergent,
yeah,
is so like, children don't think that way.
because they're
And
children and they're dumb.
yeah,
Right.
and so at some point you have to overcome the way that human beings naturally think about the universe, and you have to like convince yourself of this thing that is very unintuitive. I
And
think
I mean,
that doesn't,
it's
that's not a
interesting.
cast iron argument to say whether it's true or
No,
not. All I'm saying is I think that the Christian perspective is is easier to believe. But it
well, I
doesn't
mean,
mean
I
that it's
find it
true or
fascinating that
false.
You are emulating. You're saying we should all think like children about this because they got it right, and it's like, yes, that's the point the atheist is making to the Christian. You are acting like children. It's a childlike fairy tale that you're believing in. But like I
No,
understand, like
so that's just the first quadrant, or the first
yes,
of three.
there's multiple.
Maybe if I'm sure after this conversation I'll think there are some things I've left out of this view, but maybe the second one would be the Bible, which you
Right,
point
the
to,
Bible.
right, as a historical source,
Mhm.
as a moral guide, all of the various ways that we've discussed that
Yeah,
document, I think, holds up extremely well to scrutiny. Um, and
and
I know you are thinking of that it's a patchwork of things that were selected at some point
oh
and
yeah,
also are self-contradictory. But in my mind,
mm,
it is unbelievably well attested compared to other historical sources. The number of early manuscripts we have for both the New and the Old Testament is out of this world. So we have extreme confidence that we have the original words in Greek for the New Testament, at least,
right.
and that it reflects things that we can date back to having been written, depending on the source, within 100 years, 50 years, 15
Sure.
years of
That's
the
that
events.
those are long periods of time, by the way. And
Well,
also we don't
it's
know the
not,
sources.
depending on what conclusion you're trying to reach. But, well, we do. What I'm saying is that we more plausibly, like far more plausibly than not, the best explanation for how all these documents are in our possession now, we dig
Uh-huh.
it out of the ground. When was it written? Why was it written? Like using all of the normal historical techniques that
Mhm.
we are happy to unquestionably lean on when we were exploring other parts of history. I mean, you're a history major, so you know more about this than me. But my
Mm.
understanding of the way that history is done means that if you look at the documents of the Bible, you would conclude that they reflect real letters written by real people that were then duplicated and come from, the years immediately after the events that they're talking about, which doesn't mean that they are true, because you could come up with alternative hypotheses. They could be lying, they could be forgeries, they could be, as in early forgeries, they could
Yeah,
be misled in some way, that something crazy could have happened and people believed it, but it was, a trick of
of
some
course.
kind.
There's a
So
million
so
things
that
that could go wrong in this process, but, like, if
but
we're sitting here trying to ascertain the truth, and this is
mm,
a courtroom, and this is a trial, like, does God exist? Is any of this true? And
yeah.
you bring in a book, and someone goes, "Hey, here's a book, and it says this, there's a murder." And you go, "Oh, okay,
Mhm.
well, who wrote the book? I don't know." You know what the judge is gonna do with your exhibit A? The whole thing is getting tossed, and you're probably gonna be held in contempt of court. Like, this is
I
ridiculous.
No,
So
I don't think
so
that's true. If most of the evidence that you bring into court has to pass some
this is
hurdle
this
of
is beyond
implausibility.
hearsay. This is literally the definition of hearsay, and so for you to take a single sentence from that book, I would take
Yeah.
massive issue with, and I know that Christians dedicate, like,
Mm,
huge portions of their life studying this random book, and it's
mm.
like,
Well,
to the atheist, it's
okay.
like the whole thing is ludicrous.
Well,
Mhm.
okay. I think there's a significant factor here, which
Yeah.
is that you are approaching the question of Jesus's resurrection, for example, from the
Yeah.
presupposition that it's unlikely to have happened, right? You have
But
prior
wait a minute.
reason to think, like,
Do you
people don't
challenge that
rise from the
presumption?
dead.
But that's
Um,
never happened before in the history of time. So, like, why? Of course, I would be under the presumption that this is a extraordinary claim. It would require extraordinary evidence.
yeah. So
And
all
like,
I'm saying, just as a pin in the ground,
uh-huh,
is if the Bible was describing something less extraordinary,
yes, right.
I don't think there'd be any doubt. All the historians would agree that the event happened historically. The reason that it's a subject of such dispute is
Of
because the
course.
thing that it's describing is so extraordinary, and
Exactly. So if
therefore it's like it has to
yeah,
meet a much higher
right,
bar of
which it doesn't
evidence.
at all. It just completely swings and misses at that attempt. But like if the Bible was just a book about how to, garden your olive tree out in Israel, no one would take an issue with it. But then it wouldn't have the selling power because it's not promising you eternal life and making these grandiose
Yeah,
claims. And so
yeah,
it wouldn't be a
yeah.
religion. We wouldn't be talking about it right now. So of course
So
it's the nature of the claim.
the third kind of, is there a word for quadrant when there's three of them? The
I think
third piece,
trident. Yeah, I don't know.
the third trident, the third spoke of my trident
Mhm.
would be the kind of apologetic arguments that I'm sure you've come across. Things
Uh-huh.
like, you know, Paley's watchmaker argument, or the
Oh boy.
teleological argument, or
Yeah,
the ontological argument, all this kind of stuff,
I
which
see.
I got very into as a teenager. That
Mm.
was kind of, in a way, my response to Dennett and Harris and so on. Was I went and read a bunch of this philosophical stuff.
Sure.
I got really excited about it and thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to go to university and I'm going to convert a bunch of people by talking about like
Uh,
premise one. And
right.
obviously, nobody has the slightest interest in talking about this very nerdy philosophical stuff.
Well, some people
Um,
do. Yeah.
but well, yes. But I guess what I was going to say is that if I take my experiences plus the apologetics stuff, those two things in conjunction predispose me to expect there to be a God who
Hmm.
is at work in the world, and there's sin and need for a solution to that. And so in a way, those two things, set up my Bayesian priors in a very
Hmm.
different way. So when I then come to the New Testament, it's in the context of, well, for a start, it's in the context of the Old Testament, which is a whole other discussion. But I
Hmm.
think it's like a magnifying glass on history, focusing all the light down onto a specific person and a specific moment. And if you're looking at Jesus as not just a random guy who was resurrected, but like this guy seems to have a particular focus and attention on him, and we already think that God exists, and then there's the evidence that he rose from the dead. Can you see how that feels very different from, instead of extraordinary evidence requiring extraordinary
Well,
claims requiring extraordinary evidence, it's much more like actually everything lines up in the exact way that I would
right.
expect. I was almost thinking that this resurrection was more odds on than off. So the fact that there's evidence that it happened is
Oh
like,
my God.
great, checkbox.
So you're like, look,
It's
because
real.
I've been brainwashed, I have a conflict of interest, and I'm completely biased. I found that the resurrection was more plausible, is what you're
Well,
saying.
in a way, the incoming beliefs when you examine Jesus is your bias. Like we've
But
talked a lot about how I have a bias, and I don't think I'm going to be able to persuade you of this, but I think that
oh,
you examine Jesus with the opposite bias.
ha. So I've been fully familiarized with Jesus and all the stories and all the mythology, but like you sit
Yeah,
here and talk about the
yeah.
resurrection, and it's like he he wasn't in the room. What was it? The room was empty. What was that's the evidence?
Well, so
Tell me.
the sequence of events is right. He was
Yeah.
executed by the Romans, and the
Yeah.
Romans are very good at killing people. They would have known that he was dead at the time they declared him dead,
Uh-huh.
and put him in a tomb. And we then see that the Romans will, well, there's an interesting sequence of things that happens because what's actually recorded is that the Romans were sort of arguing back against the early disciples. So the disciples were saying he's risen from the dead.
Okay.
The obvious thing for the Romans to do, or the Jewish, the Jewish leaders or
Mhm.
whatever, would be here's his body. right? He's not. He's stop this troublesome Christian movement that is trouble for both the Jews and the Romans, because you're claiming that Jesus rose from the dead, but here is his body. So they said that the Roman guards were asleep, which is pretty implausible. Why would you say that the Roman guards were asleep in the first place?
Is this, by the way, is this the testimony of the women? Don't women come in?
That's an interesting wrinkle. The first people recorded as having seen Jesus risen from the dead were women. And the argument there is that if you were making this up, if you were sitting in a room like, we've got to make up this story about Jesus rising from the dead, you'd be like, he ran into our brainiest lawyer, who was obviously a man.
Women's testimony was worth like a
I don't know if it was even admissible in court at the time.
Well, none of this would be. But wait a minute. On a macro level, though, the main evidence for Jesus' resurrection is the tomb is empty. I mean,
well, and then lots of people, claimed to have seen him alive as well.
But the eyewitness accounts, I'm willing to be very skeptical about. But as far as there's so many other explanations as to what could have happened to this body.
I think you'd find that it's much easier as a general comment. It's way easier to pull down a theory than it is to construct one, right? Do you get what I mean?
These theories, I mean, these are very easy to. But what I'm wondering,
I could poke holes in somebody's argument that was positive, even if it was a very solid argument. I could find reasons to be skeptical.
Sure.
Whereas, so what I'm saying is, if you put forward a specific counter narrative about the series of things that you think would best explain the evidence that we have, then if I poke holes in it, then it's very easy for you to sort of scamper to the next explanation along and kind of dodge from one explanation to another. Any of the specific explanations has some quite significant implausibility about it.
But the story you're presenting, and this is quite central to all of Christianity, is that he rose from the dead. It's
rose from the dead, which is implausible itself.
It's an incredible claim. And if I said, no, they simply moved his body, or the report was not correct, or the witnesses lied, or that was made up, these are far more reasonable. So we're talking about, why would we be this gullible? And I'm concerned about your gullibility. If you're willing to believe this based off of that evidence, what else are you willing to believe? And then it leads me to this. Why don't we have a conversation where you and I go in and completely decimate the thousands of other religions that you and I do not believe in? I would be fascinated to hear why you think those aren't true.
Yeah. Have you heard that Christians were called atheists by the Romans because of their refusal to believe in the gods?
The Roman gods.
They're sort of, so many Christians, in a way, are the hipster new atheists.
But
we got
really,
there before you.
At the end of that discussion would be, obviously there's common ground. You're an atheist on every religion. I am but one. And it's like, then it becomes, why do we believe what we believe? Like, what is that process? What is it founded on? And that's when you really get to the heart of the issue. And this goes to the UFO alien stuff. It's the same debate. How do you know what you know? Why do you believe this? Because that you believe it is, not that interesting to somebody outside of you. It might do wonders for you. Yeah. I'm wondering.
I would have a lot in common with other religions. There would be various ways in which my beliefs line up with a Muslim or line up with a Hindu, rather than lining up with you. So
for example, the Book of Mormon. Let me just mention that during this resurrection, they claim that Jesus went to America in this 3-day period.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Now, why? They have their reasons for that. Why do you not believe that?
Well, I mean, I'll give you my view on why I believe that. You might disagree, but
No,
I think
but
having
here's the
looked into the evidence, I
uh-huh.
don't think I don't think it stacks up. I think
Okay.
it's more
Well,
plausible to believe that he didn't go to America. The counter
mhm.
view that Jesus didn't go to America, it it to me
Okay.
explains more of the evidence
So
than that
so
he did.
let me follow up on this. You know, you talk about these women that saw Jesus after he had been
Yeah.
resurrected. Where was that? Geographically, where was that?
Well, so Mary Magdalene, I think, might have been the first person to see Jesus. That was in the garden, and she thought initially that he was a gardener.
What
It
garden?
was like,
Where does this take place? This is in what city?
so in Jerusalem. So
Okay.
Joseph of Arimathea was the person who owned the tomb that Jesus got put in. He was a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin,
Mhm.
and consequently, he's not the kind of person who would have benefited from being a part of this new Christian upstart religion. It would have been embarrassing for him to have been
Okay.
involved in this. But yes,
So
we
let's
the specific tomb would have definitely been identifiable at the time.
okay. So to the claim, forget the rising from the dead part, but the claim that Jesus was in a tomb in Jerusalem, then he was seen later by some women at another part of Jerusalem, is the claim. That
Hmm.
is believable, more believable than he dipped out into the south of America, crossed an ocean. And the question is, how on earth could he do that? I can understand him being seen somewhere else in Jerusalem. Again, forget the resurrection part. But the claim itself
Yeah,
is much more ludicrous. So this is, I'm suggesting, I'm offering you a reason why you might not believe
yeah,
in Mormonism, just based off that.
yeah. I see what you're saying. I think the thing that's missing is um, it reminds me of some of the kind of spaghetti monster
Yes.
logic, which is to say, if we delete all the context or change all the details, then that shouldn't make any difference to the plausibility of the claim. And I actually think it does make a difference. So um, the the context that surrounds the evidence for the resurrection is a lot of very ancient texts from
Okay, you're
all
talking about
around the region. So
the
you are
predictions.
set up. Well, yeah,
Mhm.
you're set up to think that it will happen. Then there are the reactions of people as it happens and right after it happens. In texts that are clearly from the time, you can look
Okay.
at the names and the places that are used. You couldn't forge this centuries later. Maybe today you could forge it with the use of the internet, but it's just
Okay, but
implausible to. So the point is, the Mormon text is written
mhm.
in a fake ye olde English, as I understand it, and was
Well,
clearly there was no evidence of this prior to Joseph Smith uncovering it
well,
in
don't you find it a little bit interesting that you have all these testimonies in the Bible, all from people
Hmm,
that you don't know? I mean, you just know them from the names written in the Bible. That's not even their real names. So you don't know those people. And yet we do know Joseph Smith. He is a
hmm,
historical figure. And
hmm.
he's telling you
Yeah,
that he connected with God and wrote down whatever, it might have been goofy Old English, but he wrote down the inspiration, the inspired word of
yeah,
God. And you don't
yeah.
believe that testimony.
No, and the reason I don't believe it is because I have a compelling alternate explanation, which is
Ha!
that Joseph Smith made it up, and that holds together a
Okay.
lot better than the alternate explanations for the resurrection. For
So,
example, the early disciples who were eyewitnesses to Jesus' resurrection
uh
then died proclaiming the truth of that. So
so
they
saith
wouldn't.
the story in the Bible. I mean,
No,
it's all made it up. So how could you say Joseph Smith made it up? I'm telling you, the person that said that these women saw Jesus, they made it up. That person made it up. How is that not equally legitimate to you?
yeah, well, you've got to ask: is it something that somebody would have a reason to do? Like humans behave based
Uh-huh.
on their incentives. So
Yes.
not so you might be able to say that a woman would be incentivized to say she had seen Jesus risen from the dead because she could get attention from it, because it would be a source of comfort to her. Maybe she had a hallucination.
No,
So
I'm saying
in
either that
isolation,
woman was incorrect, that they've
yeah,
made a false assessment of the situation, or the person that
sure.
wrote that story completely made it up.
Okay, two different
But you're not
scenarios,
even
right?
entertaining those. You're entertaining it happened,
Mm.
and now we're just dealing
Well,
with the aftermath of how it was reported.
no, I want to take seriously the counter factual. No, what's the
Okay,
term? You know, the
narrative.
alternative
Yeah.
hypotheses, right?
Okay,
But you can't fire them out like a machine gun. You have to
but why are
stop
you
and
not?
consider a specific alternative. So, did the woman think that she had seen Jesus risen from the dead and was mistaken, but told everybody? And
Uh-huh.
does that explain all of the evidence that we have? And the
I'm saying
answer,
that
if we
evidence is scant, and I'm saying there doesn't even have to be a woman. Why are we even granting there is a woman?
well,
We don't know the
if
author of the text.
okay, so fine.
So, but
What I'm
why
saying
is
is
it that you don't
we
lose
could,
sleep over Mormonism and Joseph Smith's
yeah.
inspired conversation with the creator of the universe? Why
Well,
are you dismissive of that?
I'm not immediately dismissive.
You're
It's
not?
that after investigation, it
Yes.
doesn't stand up
But but
to the rigors of
but you are
my
to
incisive
Mormonism.
analysis.
You are to Mormonism as atheists are to Christianity. And I'm not
Yeah.
seeing any actual difference as to what would made you discard that account
Well,
and
I
not.
I don't think there's a good alternative hypothesis that
But wait a minute,
explains all the
this is
evidence.
something. This is the God-shaped hole in your heart. What do you mean alternative? There has to be an alternative. There has to be
Yeah.
something
Well,
magical and awesome out there.
I I don't know that we are. I don't know that you're correctly characterizing the difference between us here, because as
Uh-huh.
far as I can see, you think of um, you think that there are lots of alternative hypotheses that would explain all of the evidence,
Okay.
right?
Wait, wait,
You
wait, wait.
think that there's
An
loads.
alternative.
You think there's
None of
hundreds
this
of
happened.
different.
Right. None of it
You,
happened. There
you think,
is no
yeah,
connection. So
yeah,
that's my theory. It didn't happen.
and
Uh-huh.
okay. How do we end up with a religion growing out of that
Very easily.
part of the world where they have this specific set of beliefs?
Go talk to the Mormons. Go. There's millions of Mormons around the world right now or Scientologists. What we've seen the formation of cults. We understand
Yeah. So
Christianity is not even original. Christianity has borrowed a million things from prior religions. We know this.
yeah, and all I'm saying is that
Mhm.
there are alternative hypotheses about what actually happened that led to the emergence of Christianity.
Okay.
That I could list 1,000 alternative hypotheses. The difference, in my opinion, between the cloud of alternative hypotheses that you might propose around Christianity and the cloud of alternative hypotheses that I would propose about Mormonism or
Uh-huh.
Islam or whatever,
Yeah.
is that I don't think that any of the alternative hypotheses around Jesus are a better explanation of the evidence than the one that I've come to, the literal belief.
Wow.
And
Clearly you don't. I mean, that's why you believe it. But
yeah,
I mean, you seem to have been adding some credence to the fact that a lot of people believe this, so there must be something to it, which I find to be interesting because that kind of bites its own tail. There's a
right,
lot of
because
people
there's
that
lots of
believe
people
in
who
a
believe
lot
other
of shit,
things.
and
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
not. Yeah, I don't understand how you get around that.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, if you trace, so you I think correctly
Mhm.
imply that any point of view that lots of people believe today is worth investigating. I would agree with that. That it warrants investigation as a human
Mhm.
living on the planet when you find out that there's a lot of passionate people urgently trying to tell you that something is true. That makes me go, I will
Okay,
investigate
but
this.
the claims, the belief system of human beings throughout all of human history, if you were to study the people on Easter Island, the Aztecs, the Incans, the Egyptians, the net result of all of it is they were all wrong. Okay, so we know that now. There's nothing to the claims that they made about the origin of the universe, about the nature of reality. They were ignorant and clueless. Now, there might be some like wisdom and some folksy, whatever within it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about at its heart, we know it's just it's one after another. They're wrong, wrong, wrong. And you don't believe in any of those things I just mentioned. And yet you have fished out this one religion from a couple thousand years ago in this one region. And for some reason, this is the one. And it doesn't even faze you that all of these other religions that are very similar and run parallel, you completely acknowledge is completely made up and totally false.
Well,
the
fact that there are lots of religions in the world is I would say is a piece of evidence that is probably in your favor, right? That is a piece of evidence on if you've got scales between Christian belief and atheist belief, it would be much stronger for the Christians if there was just Christians and atheists. The fact that there's loads of fairly similar religions is a kind of point in favor of atheism.
I don't know how many there are, like what, 10,000 religions? It's some huge number. Obviously, not major religions, but
no, and they massively inflate it because, for example, if there's one guy who has his own idiosyncratic belief,
sex,
there's another one.
Right, but every cult and every religion from ancient times until now, it is a formidable list, and you and I are in total lockstep agreement that they're all false and wrong, and yet we're sitting here haggling on the final one, basically, and it's like. And that's why it's so weird because
it's a cute way of phrasing it. The thing is that you and I are not in lockstep agreement about the details. Like in many ways, I'm in lockstep agreement with all the other religions about the fact that there is I don't know if
they're right in spirit, but they just didn't get
the human being. I'll come back to my intuitive, childlike. This isn't an argument. This is just.
Sure.
But I think it is natural for humans. No, so let's say, just to be within a secular frame for a second, there's no reason that an evolutionary process would produce beings that believe true things, right? I think this is in some ways a Dawkins' point that religion is mimetic. So
it serves a purpose.
So for whatever reason, it does appear that human beings have a tendency to believe in spirituality broadly, in some sense, that their spirit lives on after their death, and that they can, vague ideas of like fate or karma, things like this. Like people just believe in. I guess I should probably read this book about magical reality because it's probably talking about this.
It's made for kids, but it's a great book. It's illustrated. It's wonderful.
If it's made for kids, then it might actually fit within my annual reading time.
Exactly.
But my point was that most people, and you were saying, if we lined up all the religions of the world, I would be in agreement with most of those people that there is truth to this innate sense that humans have about the spiritual nature of reality. And you would be in opposition to almost everybody,
but this
in saying
is
that this is
game.
Just an illusion.
This is semantics. You're using the word spirituality interchangeably with religious belief and a belief in God. I don't accept that.
Well, I'd say that if you could draw a diagram, right, spirituality is the broadest possible circle.
Okay.
Like
But
within spirituality, there are more specific beliefs. Like you could have concentric circles where my specific set of Christian beliefs is this minute little circle surrounded
yeah,
by more and more vague versions of it.
but you guys always act like you're the only ones that have feelings or can experience awe or wonder or love or have sacred, cherished moments in your life. Like atheists do all this too. This is not
Mm.
special to you. We just don't believe in the claims of some
No,
ancient script. Like,
I think that's what we're saying is that maybe it would be more accurate to say we are the only. Well, I say we are the
mhm,
only, as if religious people are a minority. Of
right,
course, that's
right,
not true. Okay,
oppressed.
but maybe to flip it round, then
Mhm.
atheists are the only people who don't have a compelling explanation for the awe and wonder in their mind. Like in your mind,
Ah,
when you experience something numinous,
mhm.
it's actually an illusion. It's like a trick.
I
It's
wouldn't
a
I wouldn't
it's
say
a
that.
fake.
I would never characterize it as that. And
No?
I mean, this is why Sam Harris
Okay.
wrote a whole book about spirituality and atheism and the fact that, yeah, this is a misconceived notion that you're sort of stapling to atheists, maybe to make it more convenient for you to be like, we are the guardians of the magical and the profound. And it's like, no, you're not. We have all of the same things. We're the same human being. It's just
Yeah,
there's
I think you have the same experiences
right,
because whether you believe it or not, you are a spiritual being. That's how I see it.
right. But
Is that
again, you've commandeered the
you
word
have
spiritual.
morals. So
And if
to go back to morality, right?
mhm,
I would claim that you have no basis for your belief in right and wrong,
but that
and then
you do
you
though.
would say,
Mhm.
but that doesn't stop an atheist from being a good person and having a belief in right and wrong. And
Well,
I would say that's true, but the belief it is inconsistent with your worldview.
no,
It's a mental contradiction that you live with. It's a cognitive
absolutely not.
dissonance.
Absolutely not. So you guys always try these little cheap tricks of like, oh, if there's good and evil, then there's God. If there's love, then there's God. If you like that music that you just listen to, there's God. If you have a sense of wonder in the world, it's God. It's like, no, this is not a funnel of logic that I'm even remotely accepting that is
Yeah,
legitimate. And it's like,
it's not a yeah. I'd push
I,
back against calling it a cheap trick
I,
because
I would say that
I'm
is what it is.
well. I'd say the term cheap trick carries the
Mhm.
implication that I know full well that it's an invalid argument and that I'm kind of arguing in
Okay.
bad faith.
Well,
Whereas
no, it's a commonly popular technique that people will
it,
use
it,
where
it
they're like,
I'm
"Do you
prepared to
believe?"
accept it. It might be
Okay,
a misconception that I have, like an inaccurate view, an invalid argument, or something like that. But I'm trying to articulate what I actually think in my own head
but
when I'm
it's
talking to myself.
because the arguments for religion and Christianity are so weak and ridiculous. They have to go to things like you'll have a street preacher walk up to a guy and say, "Do you love your wife?" "Oh yeah." "Okay, well then," and then eventually he's like, "Well then God exists." Because how could there be love? Love is not physical. It's not material. Like it's just super insulting to our intelligence, and they're grasping at anything. Consciousness is the thing. The brains are pretty complex. Oh, well, yeah, that's God. Love, God. Um, good and evil, God. I mean, you don't see the jarring sort of disconnect of how are you getting from A to B on these things? It's it's
Yeah,
not compelling at all.
I think it's a well. So to kind of take a step back from the specifics of this
Hmm.
particular disagreement, um, that there's going to be lots of cases where there's a philosophical topic that's being discussed, right? And one side of it is right and the other side is wrong. Like the argument, I do believe in capital T truth. There is some reality. I think we are. alike in this, right?
Mm,
You would
mhm.
say that there is something that is the fact of everything out there, and you have your view, your opinion about what the world is like, and you can either be correct or incorrect. Right? Your view will. The aim is to try to line up your view with actual reality as best as we can. And you could have two people who are very genuinely discussing some argument back and forth, and one side will be correct and the other side will be wrong, but both sides could be really earnest and genuine in that they really believe what they're arguing for, and the other side really believes as well, and they just are also correct. And
Yeah.
I think the way to characterize that disagreement is that the one side has just made a mistake somewhere along the lines. I mean,
Yeah.
they might be arguing in bad faith, and you kind of detect that sometimes in debates. It's really annoying because I'm not really interested in the spectacle. But I think a lot of the time, two people can have a genuine disagreement, and it doesn't have to be that they're pulling a trick or something like this.
Mhm. 1 second.
Sure.
Keep going.
Okay, I'll keep talking. I was just talking about the characterization that is made of the debates, probably on both sides, to be fair. But I obviously notice it a lot more and smart a little bit more when it's an accusation against the religious that implies that they're being they're acting in bad faith, that they
Right.
don't really believe the arguments that they're putting forwards. And I think I'd like to be more charitable to
Sure.
both sides and say that actually, whether they're thinking clearly or not, they are at least self-convinced about the
No,
arguments.
that is true. I mean, I'm actually in a slight degree of amazement that you are a true believer. Like I almost feel like you woke
Given
up
that
from a coma.
Given that I can put two sentences together.
Well, right. It's like it's intriguing. It's mystifying to me. But I do grant the truth of your belief. Like you actually believe this. And so when it comes to good faith, I mean, it's ironic because you do have a lot of faith, but it is in good faith. And I mean, it's such an intriguing thing because I don't know that your side's impressions of atheists are accurate. And I feel
That's
like
interesting.
a lot of assumptions that you guys make that I think it makes it easier for you to rationalize your belief to make atheist belief seem more crazy than it actually is.
Yeah,
So
there's probably a lot of that going on in both directions. I will admit that may be true, and I would definitely be willing to grant that you have wonder and awe and love, and you experience the beauty of music or a sunset in just the exact same way as I do. I think if
we attribute it to different things and we describe it in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, I think that my explanation is better than your explanation, and vice versa. But you would probably think, like me, that because your explanation of these things holds up better, therefore it's actually evidence in your court.
Well, I find it interesting that you need an explanation of the kind that you adopt. In other words, you're not willing to accept anything at face value and just say, this thing is the way it is, and I don't need to have some convoluted thought process to take me to some supreme leader in the sky kind of vibe. Like I don't know why you can't accept the nature of the universe as it is and the nature of the human being as we are. Why you need there to be some engineer behind all
that. There's probably a really interesting difference here that we haven't properly dug into, and I don't think we're going to probably have time to properly work through this. But
next time.
that would be great. this question of the default belief, where
Yeah.
the atheist community is, I think, pretty aligned and makes quite. I would credit you with a strong argument that
Mhm.
is that the default is not to believe in anything. So you
Right.
don't believe in the what is it? The teapot between Jupiter and Saturn was the Carl Sagan example.
Oh, really?
You know, you don't believe in
Yeah.
anything
I don't
by
believe in a
default.
form of government. I don't believe in the right to bear arms. I don't believe in the right to free speech. Like, these are things
Yeah,
that you have to assert and have a reason for and adopt.
yeah. And I I think we won't go into this debate now,
Mhm.
but I just want to put a pin in it as like
Sure.
I actually think that is a point of disagreement that's very interesting to me, where I really think it is very reasonable
Mhm.
to believe in something by default. So the burden of proof is in the other direction. Um,
Well, and
and
wouldn't that be very convenient for you? There is a God. Prove there isn't. Hey, I didn't murder this person. Let's all
yeah,
pretend that's the default.
well,
Prove that
in
it.
some ways, yeah, like I was saying earlier about constructing an argument versus tearing it down. I think you can always tear down any argument, basically. So in a way, whatever you define as being the default position, the the
Okay.
the baseline,
Sure.
you probably are going to believe, and the burden of proof is almost never reached. So, like in the case of, we keep talking about a court of law,
Yeah.
if there's a murder trial,
Right.
the default is to assume that the person didn't murder the
Innocent.
person,
Yeah, you're
and then
innocent
the
until proven
burden
guilty.
of proof requires like a high level of evidence. Now, the threshold of evidence is higher in a criminal trial than in a civil trial. You know,
Correct.
civil trial is a preponderance of the evidence, I think, whereas
Mhm.
it's beyond a reasonable doubt if you're going to lock
Right.
somebody up or execute them, depending on which state you're in. And now the threshold for changing your belief about something like God
Mhm.
is going to be sky high. So in some
Yeah.
ways, I can see why, from an atheist perspective, if you start with the the default is not to believe, and it's an extraordinary claim, it renders belief in God almost impossible
No, not it
from
wouldn't be
first
impossible.
principles.
If you had a good case, it wouldn't be impossible at all. You just deliver your evidence and show us why you believe this. And if it's a solid case, we would believe you. Just like if there's a guy who's an obvious murderer and there's a good case against him, the jury believes it. It's not an
Yeah,
impossible task. Your task is impossible because you're believing in an invisible entity that, by the way, you probably couldn't even describe coherently. If I were to ask you what even is God, it would probably be some, like, maybe because you're a scholar of it, you'd have some thing you could
I'm sure
regurgitate. But
I could wit on for hours about
right, but
the
but you
greatest
must
imaginable
admit
being or whatever. Yeah,
But you must admit that it is completely not agreed upon. It's totally amorphous, and it's hardly even a
yeah.
solid concept. So it's almost even beyond that you're wrong. It's You don't even know what you're even asserting. It's like you
Within
don't
the
even.
within the broadest circle of spiritual people,
Hmm,
what they mean when they say they have a faith is
yeah,
enormously varied. I will
sure,
agree with you.
definitely, definitely.
Um, and so I guess all I'm saying is that the way you set up the thought experiment,
Yes.
I think, as that, starting from atheist methodology, I
Yeah.
think reaches a conclusion that is different from truth. It's a sort of systematic error whereby the method leads you to the wrong conclusion, and to kind of weed that out, as I say, is
But
probably
it's not an atheist. You've just ascribed that to atheism. It's not. This is reason. This is a basic. The
well,
burden of proof is
it's
not something we just made up to make it easier for us to argue with Christians.
no, the burden of proof is the idea that a positive belief in a thing
Uh-huh.
requires a burden of proof, but disbelief in the thing does not require a burden of proof.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that stated outside of debates where it was an atheist's
But
position.
this wouldn't
It's an
hold up under.
epistemological.
Yeah. But this wouldn't hold up, and if we were discussing anything that wasn't emotionally charged for you, this would be a no-brainer. If I said to you, does
Well, if look at it this way, do you? Okay, right. I've just pulled up a Wikipedia article. Okay, on the. Hang on. The silver goldfish. Okay, which is a type of goldfish, but so it was known as the silverfish until they realized that it was part of the broader category of goldfish. And they live around the islands of Indonesia. Do you believe in the existence of the silver goldfish? And like, what is your default? Do you believe in it or not? Oh, I've lost him. Clearly, my silver goldfish thought experiment was a step too far. Hang on. Let's. Oh, actually, since this is a recording, I can pause. That's exciting. All right. Well, this may or may not be the end of the stream, but we are approaching 3 hours, so I may have overstayed my welcome. I've realized there's a button to pause the recording, so we didn't even lose any.
Oh, wow.
The audience isn't aware that I just sat waiting for 18 hours for you to return.
Amazing. Sorry, I forgot. I got cut off. Sorry about that. The internet just died out. But I was
no worries.
Some point where I was tickled by the idea that you think you could slip out of the burden of proof.
That's right. Yeah. So I really think that if anything, the default position would make sense to be agnosticism. Like I could probably make a case.
Now you've committed the fallacy of thinking that atheists are not agnostics. We're all agnostics. It just cancels out. I mean, no one is saying with 100% certainty anything.
If you're 95% sure God doesn't exist, and I'm 95% sure, okay, if you're 99% sure God doesn't exist, and I'm 99% sure that God does exist, then we're both agnostics.
Exactly. So the term itself is a cop-out. I have I'm very irritated by the whole, it's just a waste of time. Agnosticism, we're all agnostic. It's like saying, I don't know, we're all air breathers. Okay, great. Fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, I've thought of a better example than the one I was giving before. I have a red T-shirt in my drawer over there. Mm-hmm. Do you believe me or not?
I would need to see evidence. And my default position is I don't believe you until it is established that it is a true thing.
Do you think most people have a red T-shirt in their drawer?
It's a non-extraordinary claim, so I am very open to believing it's a possibility.
What if I said I have a T-shirt in my bedroom?
That's even likelier, more likely.
Even more likely. You could almost say that in the case of somebody's claim that a red T-shirt exists in their room, the burden of proof would actually be the opposite. It would be, can you prove that there isn't a T-shirt in their room?
But also, this is stripped of one thing which I think is super applicable, and instrumental in all of this, which is it doesn't matter emotionally to you or spiritually to you whether or not you do have a T-shirt in your room. So it's not, your whole life isn't hinging on the truth claim of this T-shirt. So we're outside of that conflict of interest.
That's true.
You have a dog in this fight.
But that aside, if we're talking about the existence of a claimed T-shirt in somebody's bedroom, then see, the methodology I'm proposing starts with complete agnosticism about the existence of that T-shirt, and then you start to examine the evidence, and the evidence might start with, well, actually, most people have T-shirts in their room, so that leans me towards believing in the existence of the T-shirt. I'd actually have to start seeing evidence that this person hates t-shirts, or maybe I go to their bedroom and search and I can't find the t-shirt, and eventually I go, okay, I'm starting to believe there isn't a t-shirt in this person's room. So that's what I mean, that when you're presented with a claim, you should not start with a predisposition one way or the other. You should start with complete 50-50, and then you start to apply the evidence that you have. Now, in the case of God and God's existence, it's not obvious to me why there being no God is a more plausible starting point than there being a God.
Okay.
And then I'd say, well, further, let's look at the evidence. Do most people throughout history have a belief in some kind of God? Well, actually, yes, most people, they might all be wrong, but it leans you. That's why I would say, if anything, the burden of proof should be the other way around, of like, why are you going to disagree with the views of most of the other people on the planet? You might have a good reason. So I'll put it, let me be a bit audacious. The extraordinary claim that God doesn't exist requires extraordinary evidence.
Right. And there are people that do that thought experiment where they take on the burden of proof, and they say, I will actively disprove God. Like it's not just that the case is so miserable and there's no evidence, but also it's interesting that you use a t-shirt, which is a mundane, normal thing that is not hard to believe. We have countless other examples of t-shirts in existence. You mentioned then, therefore, you then jump to the God thing. We have zero other examples of gods. There is no such thing. It is a man-made fiction, and so it's such a wild departure from and so you're like, why can't you just assume there's a God like you assume there's a t-shirt? Because the nature of the thing you're proposing is vastly different. And there's no reason to believe it. There would be a God. There is a reason to believe that you might have a t-shirt.
I'm more making a methodological argument that is, I think you can go through any statement and argue from first principles about whether it's true or not, starting from a 50-50 and then considering the evidence. And it could be that Tesco's is selling an egg, an individual egg, right? Or you could have the statement, Tesco's is not selling an individual egg. And either way, I'd say you start with 50-50, and then maybe you Google around and you find it on their website and you go, okay, then the evidence is... The reason that atheists might have a good reason to say the burden of proof is on the believers is because they think that God is an extraordinary claim. The existence of God is extraordinary. As you imply, we have nothing to compare this God to. We can't see him. We can't interact with him. I think these are reasonable evidence. I think it's just more honest to start with 50-50 and then start to apply the evidence one side or the other.
Right, but your 50-50 doesn't make sense for the following reason. I can't disprove something. Like I can't prove a negative. You say Tesco's is selling a single egg. I say, no, it's not. You go, prove it. Like, here's my anti-evidence. Like there is nothing for me to show you to establish the negative. So that's why it's not a 50-50. You have to, the person making the claim is the one that needs to establish it.
Yeah, but here's how I would do it, right? Is Tesco selling a single egg? Start with 50-50, okay?
Yeah.
I don't know. Don't know one way or the other. I don't have an opinion. Right. Let's go on their website and look up egg. Okay, when I look at the list of eggs, they're selling them in 6, 20, and 40 cartons. All right. Well, now my probability on whether Tesco's is selling individual eggs has vastly shifted. And I'm now like 99.9% sure that they're not selling individual eggs. And therefore I have not proven, you're right, that full 100% proof is pretty much
But
unattainable. But
what you're describing as 50-50, we should start with the 50-50. We already
yeah.
do. That's called agnosticism.
Hmm.
We are at that stage where we go, you say,
Okay.
Zeus exists, and we go, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Where's your evidence? You produce none. We go, look, I don't believe it because there's no evidence. There's no reason for me to believe it. So therefore, I'm just going to come up with another word. Yes, technically, I'm still agnostic. Maybe tomorrow you come with something, but for now, I'm an Zeusist. I don't believe in this. So, you're asking a guy to get up on trial for murder and go prove you didn't murder. And it's like,
well, I've noticed that we've just ticked over the 3-hour mark, and I'm feeling bad because I invited you on here under the pretense that this was going to be a 1-hour conversation.
I apologize.
And I'm apologizing to you for trampling all over your time.
Christian apologetics. Yes.
Yes, and I'm also considering the meme value of scoring you like -12 for this round.
Exactly, that's incredible.
Proving my point by the power of.
I think it's quite tragic that you and I talk about life and death and the human condition and the afterlife, and meanwhile, probably the conversation goes on so long we both just die of natural causes. Doesn't even matter.
Incredible.
There's no time left.
So there is one more round after this.
Okay.
So I'm suggesting we go on to the next round. I'm not personally in a hurry, but out of courtesy to you as a guest, I want to offer you the ability to speed rounds.
Very gracious of you.
And I'm going to give you 14 as a score for this, which I didn't even show you, but I did type it in. Literature, software and mathematics, and eschatology. I don't know if you know what eschatology is
I believe that's a scat play.
That's right. As you can imagine, that's what I want to talk about, really. No, eschatology is about the study of the end times and kind of end time prophecy.
Yeah, let's do that. Get some rapture going on.
So if you want to keep talking religion,
we're in the end. We're in the end times of the conversations. Let's go to the end.
We are in many ways in the end times. Do you actually want to do that?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Mm-hmm. The book of Revelation should be interpreted allegorically.
Hopefully.
that Jesus will return after the millennium.
Which one?
Or yes. Contemporary events are signs of the end times.
Oh, Jesus. Well, I mean, these are very interesting, but self-refuting, I think. I would say, like, what on earth is Jesus going to do if he comes back? Like, what would his mission be? What would that be like?
I think the pictures of Jesus in Revelation are much more like he's riding around on a horse, dispensing justice. It's a much more masculine kind of fire and brimstone Jesus at that.
Well, it reminds me of Return of the Jedi, where it's like Luke has been, he's in a robe, he's clearly mastered the craft of the Force.
Yeah,
he's not messing about.
Yeah, and then you're worried he's going to turn to the dark side.
He never did he? Luke, he resisted.
No, it's a fascinating example of how to resolve a story in a way that's thematically consistent, I would argue.
Oh, do you put religious symbolism onto the Star Wars saga?
That's a good question.
There's incest.
Well, there's, of course, George Lucas was interviewed by Charlie Rose once about the religious significance of Star Wars, and he said that one of his intentions when he was making Star Wars was to reawaken the spirituality of America
in an a-religious way. But all those guys were priests in a way. They're all sort of
and George Lucas, of course, was a student of Joseph Campbell, who was an anthropologist who drew parallels between the religions of all the different parts of the world. The other person whose famous and has taken a lot of lessons from Joseph Campbell is Jordan Peterson.
Oh boy.
Um,
So,
and of course,
would you say the Force is the Holy Spirit?
There's the virgin birth, isn't there, in Phantom Menace? Shmi conceives Anakin without a father.
Is that right? It actually works in the inverse in Disney movies where there's no mothers. All these characters,
everyone's an orphan.
Yeah, they got no mom, because it almost it sullies it, or there's something more pure about not having a parent.
Or possibly. Well, I wonder if it's that mothers protect children from danger,
right.
Whereas movies and stories need danger. It's kind of, there's almost a adventurous spirit that is thinking, what if my mother wasn't around? Could I?
Yeah.
We at the very beginning of the stream we're talking about why conflict on the internet is so popular.
Yeah.
And I kind of think part of it is that we rehearse. We like entertainment that lets us rehearse potential emergency situations, so that we're ready for it if it happens to us.
Yeah,
in a safe environment.
In a simulation. Yeah, it's like in Beauty and the Beast, Belle, if she had a mom, the mom would be like, "What are you doing dating a monster? Like, what are you?" Or like Geppetto.
Yeah.
If Geppetto had a wife, maybe Pinocchio wouldn't have been so eager to just go out and hang out with the wrong crowd. And maybe they're buzzkills. Mothers are buzzkills.
Isn't there a Epstein Island situation in Pinocchio?
Yeah, that's a messed up island. It's actually a really scary film. All that stuff. But it is interesting to see the morphing of Disney films over time and how the morality in the films has changed to fit with the current times. Yeah, because I mean, a lot of those stories go back a long time, several hundred years, some of them, and there's a tale. There's a morality in there embedded in them.
Yeah, comes back to the everything is a remix thing, right? Shakespeare frequently reused myths.
Well, that's the Lion King. That's Hamlet. I mean, that's the same story.
I've heard this. I've never actually stopped to figure out the similarity, but yeah.
Well, it also literally lifted off of another story, but yeah, it's we give a pass to it. If you put enough creativity into something, we're not going to hold it against you that you didn't invent melody.
People way overrate ideas and way underrate execution, I would argue.
Yeah. Because you could say, "Oh, this movie is formulaic," and it's like, yeah, it's a formula that works, and when done right, it's like making a good batch of pancakes and maple syrup. It's like it's not original, but if you nail it, it could be amazing.
Partly, I'm very aware of this at the moment. We're talking about movies. One of the other projects I've got that I'm working on at the moment is an old-timey radio play where I've written the script. I've got a bunch of people to act all the different parts, and I'm scoring the whole thing. I'm putting music under it.
Is it a
start to finish? It's kind of like The Matrix is probably the nearest comparison. So it's sci-fi.
There's a new Matrix going to be coming out. I just saw a report.
Is it?
Yeah, a guy I used to play video games with. Actually, he's a writer called Drew Goddard. He's used to write for Lost, and he's done a bunch of movies. But now he's going to be writing and directing the new Matrix.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, people will watch that with a chip on their shoulder, like they do with anything, with Dune, Star Wars.
Yeah, did you see that the Wachowskis are claiming that the original Matrix was supposed to be an allegory for the experience of being transgender?
I mean, there's transitioning loosely, but it's I don't know.
I think if that's true, then they accidentally made something that's much more interesting and compelling than they were intention. The trans allegory interpretation of the Matrix makes the Matrix a less well-turned movie.
Well, why did they not have any trans characters in the film if they were so trend-setting and brave?
Yeah, well, indeed. I guess you could argue they were working within the constraints of the studio at the time.
Or maybe they were so convincing as fully
Mm,
realized trans people that I didn't even notice that they weren't
yeah.
biologically. Yeah.
There is a woman with short hair, so that's pretty
Right. That's
subversive.
borderline lesbian. She's bi-curious, but
Yeah.
she's the one that died, right? She says, not like this.
Trinity.
Oh,
Yeah.
Trinity. I'm talking about the
I was
blonde chick.
thinking of. Oh no, I was just no. Anyway, do you want to pick one of these categories?
Yes, I'm going end times. I'm saying contemporary events are signs of the end times.
Hmm. And are you arguing for or against? Because
Um,
as you remember, this is a very serious debate show,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we
exactly.
don't.
We're back at Oxford here.
Yeah.
Well, I obviously don't think there is such a thing as end times. So I'm going to say that contemporary events. This is like saying current year. It's gonna
Yeah.
it's end times because current year is
Yeah.
there.
Have you come across this phrase "late stage capitalism"?
Yes, I've heard this.
Which seems wild to me that it's become just a phrase that people drop into conversation like it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
well agreed existent thing. Because
Well,
surely, if late stage capitalism is accurate, that
mhm.
implies that people know what's going to happen in the future.
Right. It's a ongoing experiment. We're not sure of these things, but I mean, you can make a really good case that the end times were. Well, we've been making that case ever since Y2K, but obviously even way before that, you can look around and be like, I don't know how scriptural you want to get with it or whatever, but I've been researching World War II
Whatever you
recently.
want to talk about, really.
Yeah, but like World War II, if you were living anywhere around that era, let alone the Great Depression or World War One was not a picnic. I mean, surely the loss of hundreds of millions of people. I don't know what the grand total was, but we're talking a huge amount of total turmoil and death and destruction. You might make a case then. Now we live in relative peace. The world is actually, we have a skirmish here or there, but overall things have gotten much better for a ton of people. Obviously, we have a new forms of problems, but I would look to the inner question of why are people so hell bent on there being end times? And is it this
Hmm.
impatience of I want to rapture out of here? That I did several videos on rapture freaks and that whole very bizarre obsessive mindset that people are seeking the rapture. They're kind of wanting to check out of life and they're
Hmm.
looking for some celestial permission for that to happen. They're encouraging, they're hoping for the end times.
What do you think of the people like Edward Gibbon compare the fall of the Roman Empire to our
Mhm.
current moment and make the case that civilizations have a natural life cycle, much like a human is not
Yeah.
going to live forever. A civilization likewise won't live
Well,
forever. And
the history would agree with that. I mean, this changes happen. New political bodies are formed. People change. Cultures change. There's migrations. There's famine and what all sorts of stuff. Then the asteroid comes. So that's just more of the same, I would say. And as far as us, I don't know if you mean the Western world or America or whatever. I think
mm,
it's all very. We're all pretty resilient. Uh, Things have gotten worse, but as a whole, I don't think we're going anywhere. Uh,
hmm,
I think that the dangers are heightened. So if anyone who has seen Oppenheimer, you know that ever since that, power has been unlocked, we've gotten like we have weaponry that's 100 times worse than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We have just millions of those. So we live, very close to the edge when it comes to there's not that much wiggle room for mistakes here. So if there's conflict, and we have a war in Israel right now with other people who back these various sides that could escalate easily. It's not We're not that far removed from seeing there's a war in Russia. If the Ukraine was part of the what's it called, the why am I blanking on the
NATO.
NATO, exactly. Then we're in a totally different scenario. Germany invaded Poland. The only reason that World War II kicked off was because we had alliances with Poland. And Poland's not far from, Poland, Ukraine. I mean, what are we doing here? So warfare, but that's even more of the same. So there's no end, there's no beginning. It's just history repeating itself.
I think the argument that is made about civilizations is not so much that the civilization is engulfed in war, than that the superpower collapses from within due to its degeneration. And the picture is almost that the up and coming nations are very red-blooded, masculine, strong, harsh places to live with authoritarian kind of leaders. And that once they've become the superpower, everyone gets comfortable and starts picking daisies and being nice to each other. And as a result, you get kind of weaker and weaker. You also get more and more permissive. So if the early stages are characterized by very strict guidelines everyone has to stay within, the late stages are all of the barriers are pushed down and people are extremely permissive morally. And the argument then is you look around what's happening now and you see the same sorts of things: sexual experimentation, gender confusion.
Well, I would say an abandonment of values, though, too, I think, and tradition. So if we don't stand for anything and everything's, equal to everything else, and we import a bunch of other cultures and we disrespect our own culture, and like, what does anything even mean anyway? I could see all of that as leading to decay and weakness.
And all it takes is another culture somewhere to spontaneously become the new upcoming. You could imagine a situation in which the US military goes to war and it turns out to be more or less powerless because all the people running it are incompetent and lazy and distracted.
Well, and the idea that the US is at the top of the food chain, it really isn't, aside from just its size and its military might. We fail and are not competitive on so many fronts. And so even with all the exceptional people in America and the technological innovation, and there are some bright spots, don't get me wrong, but on the whole, education, we're not competitive. Standard of living, happiness index, drug rates, suicide rates, like America's no city on the hill. We're not a role model for other people, but we got a bunch of weapons. Go America. It's really kind of a false notion that we were even Rome to begin with.
And recent military conquests have not even been particularly successful. What happened in Afghanistan, what happened,
exactly.
even
Vietnam. Yeah, I mean, it's not. But we live off the embers of the victory that we think we had in World War II, and that was righteous, and that solidified us as being the good guys of history, and we're going to police the world. And we really took a lot of inspiration from that, which when you inspect is not all it's cracked up to be. And so as far as a national identity and having patriotism and having something to be bonded over, it's really slim pickings for America, and all of the problems are shining through and are on full display. The internet is fully displaying every horrible wrinkle we have as a nation. And so I would definitely not be adverse to hearing, some pretty pessimistic assessments of our country.
Well, I'm going to give you 13 points for that, which brings us to the high score table, which I will refresh, and we'll find out where you land. There you are, second place. You are ahead of all these people. I don't know how many of these. You know Carl Benjamin, of course.
Oh yeah, Carl. Yeah.
There you are. Look, 2 points ahead of him. No, 4 points ahead of him. Probably. I'm guessing you don't know most of these people, but you've beaten them to a pulp.
First of all, this is like somebody revealing their body count on a first date. I can't believe you've talked to other people before me.
Well, this is my dating strategy. At the end of the date, I will reveal on the high score table how well she's done.
You talked to Frodo Baggins?
He only got 57, so embarrassing showing from the Shire.
Rubbish. Well, yeah, it's delightful to enter into a conversation that I don't know where it's going, and I was enthralled to actually explore not only what you think about things, but what I think about things, because I don't really map all this out and explain it to myself. So it's sort of unfolding to me as I think about it, which is fun.
Yeah, it's something that I've discovered in the past few years is the power of external processing. For the as I think a lot of repressed young men in the UK experienced the first 20 years of my life. I basically just thought a lot of things inside my head, never talked to anyone about it.
Yeah,
and it's not a very good way to progress your thinking.
Express why you believe what you believe in public and make it coherent and make it lucid.
Yes.
Like that's easier said than done. So
yeah, and the way that I express myself is influenced by a lot of people. I think I would count you as one of them. I think
I've completely failed in influencing you as a hardcore Christian. Everything I've said, you've completely water off a duck's back.
If only you had been more laser focused on atheism for the last 5 years, you could have had another.
I've lost the battle.
Got distracted.
Rome has fallen.
I massively have enjoyed talking to you, and would be very keen. You'll have, if you're up for it, you'll have more opportunities to convince me to come and join you for absolutely no eternal significance, in your opinion.
Exactly.
And potentially at the loss of my salvation on my side. So it's a dicey business. But
well, I mean, look, I'm flattered that you even did some preparation for this conversation. I mean, how often do you get that? Most of the time people are just off the cuff and it's random and it's fleeting and whatever. So
it's a fun format, isn't it? It's good. It's people have come on, and almost everyone who's joined has said that they've really enjoyed it. I'm hoping when I publish these that they're actually fun to listen to as well. But as long as we've had a good time, then we're winning, right?
Anything else is just extra. It's gravy, and you can't do it with that in mind. But yeah, I had a good time, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you very much.